3 counties, 24 cities, working together, accomplishing more than any of us could alone. Whether your roots run generations deep, or you recently moved to Greater Portland, you are a part of Metro, the nation's only regional government elected by the people. Planning for the future, preserving what we love. Let's keep our region thriving for decades to come.
I'm Micah Reese, and I'm the Dive Safety Officer here at the Oregon Zoo, and safety is a big part of my job. Some of the things we consider here is diver safety. I'm out here at the Oregon Zoo, and you're at the Metro Regional Center. The council chamber is located on the 3rd floor of this building. In the event of fire or fire alarm, please exit through the door in the northeast corner of the room, go down the steps to the 2nd floor, and exit through the main entrance by the reception desk and gather in the courtyard outside the entrance. In the event of a medical or fire emergency, please call 911 and notify the security agent at the front desk. The nearest defibrillator is mounted on the steps leading from the reception desk down to Grand Avenue. Thank you.
Good morning. I'd like to call to order the Metro Council work session of November 6, 2025. Georgia, will you please call the roll?
Councillor Nolan.
Good morning.
Councillor Gonzalez.
Morning.
Councillor Rosenthal.
Good morning.
Councillor Wong.
Present.
Councillor Simpson.
Present.
Councillor Lewis is excused today, and Council President Peterson.
Here. Thanks. Council, we have our Regional Supportive Housing Services Reform update next. But before we go into that, I have been hanging on to something that I now need to formally present to our attorney.
Fun.
1 year late, I would like to give you your 5-year service pin. It was given to me late, so let's just be clear. But I just wanted to take this moment before we launch into everything to thank Carrie for 6 years of service. Can't believe it's been that long, but your steadfastness in solid legal advice, help with policy when needed, and how the two interact together, and just being able to continually help us find better outcomes for the community. We want to take this time and say thank you. So a round of applause for Carrie. I have no, but well, we do have lunch for you.
I guess if I may.
Just for you.
Just for you, while you watch me. No, if I just may for a moment, thank you. It is my distinct pleasure to serve the Metro Greater Portland community and to serve this council. So thank you for your recognition, and I look forward to many more years.
We'll make sure 10 is on time. All right.
Who's counting?
Who's counting? With that, let's launch into our Regional Supportive Housing Services Reform update. Our work session today is to dig into the package of proposed SHS reforms to the improved outcomes for people in our region experiencing homelessness or becoming homeless. We have our interim housing director, Liam Frost, to kick us off. We're going to have a staff presentation, and then I'm going to ask some questions. I've got a sheet. We've talked about going through matrices to try and pull apart the elements and have some discussion about those and make sure we're heading in the right direction so we can come back with a proposal. So I'll kick it off to Liam, and then we can facilitate the discussion afterwards.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Council. Good morning, Madam President. It's a pleasure to be here. For the record, my name is Liam Frost. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the Interim Director of Housing here at Metro. I'm joined by the SHS Division Director, Yesenia Delgado, and we will provide a brief presentation despite the number of slides that we have in this deck. We're going to zip through them. Go to the next slide, please, Georgia, if you would. This is a continuation of a work session from a few weeks ago where we provided a presentation on the current state of the Supportive Housing Services Initiative. The purpose of today's work session is to seek your feedback and guidance as we prepare to bring back a work plan for your approval in December, as President Peterson just mentioned. So to that end, today we're providing Council with an overview of the 5 draft concepts for reform that we've discussed with you in one-on-one briefings. We believe these proposals are common sense, responsive to the voluminous feedback we've gotten over the almost 2 years of engagement, and will significantly strengthen the system. Before we move on to the next slides, I just want to say thank you to Commissioner Ben West of Clackamas County, Commissioner Shannon Singleton of Multnomah County, and Commissioner Jerry Willey of Washington County. We've provided them with briefings. We've sought their feedback as key members of the President's work group from earlier in this year. I also want to thank my county counterparts who have been strong partners in this work in developing these proposals. And then I also want to thank you all, as well as our attorneys, Shane Abner and Carrie McLaren, for their support in getting to this point. We're now in the final lap, so thank you. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, this is a continuation of that work session on October 14th, where Yesenia and I presented on the current state. We shared these high-level areas to help prepare you for your discussion today. We really focused in on that feedback we've gotten through the engagement of almost 2 years. By my count, it was over 50 different partners and interested parties that have been engaged over the last 2 years. We've gotten that feedback, and it's been largely consistent. There's been a lot of overlap with the Stakeholder Advisory Table, the Metro President's Work Group, and not to forget the members of the SHS Oversight Committee and the Tri-County Planning Body, who have consistently provided engagement and feedback since the inception of those committees. Next slide, please. So as we introduce the new reform concepts today, please keep in mind that these are the driving principles that we've collected from that engagement that I just mentioned. Streamlined governance, a clear sense of regional alignment, updated goals and key performance indicators, and then greater outcomes and funding transparency. None of those are really in a vacuum. They all work together to provide clarity and a higher functioning system. And none of these should be surprising at this point. So we're going to move quickly to the next slide. This is the last slide that we are going to use to help ground the discussion before we move into the reforms. Again, this is a reminder that staff are responsible for preparing a work plan for your approval. It is designed on an 18-month timeline to reflect how dynamic this work is. It also reflects that we as an organization are not hesitant to make changes as we see fit to respond to needs, emerging or otherwise. So that means as we're implementing this work plan, should you approve it, we will continue to improve and make adjustments as necessary, informed by this council. All right, next slide, please. Here's the list of the 5 areas of reform. You're now all very familiar with these areas. We're going to go through each of them. For the sake of time this morning, I want to ground us in process. So that number 1 is probably the most important to this council at this point and where you'll be engaged the most. And that's why we're going to tackle that one last. So Yesenia is going to kick us off with regional investments. I'm going to talk about KPIs, and we'll finish off with data administration. We'll then ask you to weigh in on those 4 pieces, and then we'll move back to the governance discussion at the end of this presentation today. Everybody good? Good. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Yesenia Delgado.
Thank you. Good morning, Council and President Peterson. For the record, my name is Yesenia Delgado. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm the SHS Division Director. If we go to the next slide, I'm going to be kicking off the reform concepts, first talking about the Regional Investment Fund. The Regional Investment Fund, as you all know, is designed to fund regional goals, strategies, and outcomes identified by the Tri-County Planning Body to support in creating a regional homeless system of care. Now, if we go to the next slide, I'll share a little bit more about the current state. So this regional investment fund does not function as a fund in its true sense, given how the SHS intergovernmental agreement structured the flow of this revenue to our county jurisdictions. Rather, it is an earmarked amount of funding that later gets allocated via county budgets to goals and associated budgets by the county planning body. And there are multiple opportunities to strengthen visibility and oversight for this critical regional investment. Even with some of the challenges that we've had, we've managed to fund really critical investments in multiple sectors across landlord recruitment and retention strategies, funding regional coordinated entry, which is how participants enter the homeless system to further regionalize efforts. And we need more of this, which is why we are bringing forth some reform concepts to further strengthen how we manage this fund. The Tri-County Planning Body has also shared their experience that the approval process for this fund can be slow and inefficient. There have been instances where we have been unable to articulate how much is in this fund due to a lack of clear reporting structures for it. As a housing department that has been charged with providing oversight and accountability for SHS, it is important that we have transparent reporting and monitoring mechanisms for this fund to be able to clearly articulate our progress and how much do we have in this fund, which really brings me into this next slide that includes our recommendation, which is to establish a clear structure and transparency framework to strengthen responsive decision-making and transparency for region-wide investments in the homeless services system. So we're still working with our county partners, all the nuances of what this framework would entail, but at a really high level, where we would start would be to inventory all of the current regional investment fund expenses. We would then work every year to release annual RIF budgeting guidance to the counties that is in alignment with the Tri-County Planning Body's plans, budgets, or priorities. We would then standardize quarterly and annual reporting templates and other reporting tools to have clear information on how the RIF is being utilized. And then we would develop a clear process for committee approval, including touch points with the SHS Executive Committee of proposed RIF budget activities prior to the county budget adoption process. If we go to the next slide. You see here our proposed timeline that really shows that we'll be creating the framework with our county partners and prepping recommendations for the future committee, developing an oversight process that involves quarterly reviews and recommendations at both staff and committee level. And you see here the dates associated that we have there. With that, I will pass it back to Liam.
Thank you. And staying with this slide just for a second, what this means, not to skip the entire presentation, but the new consolidated committee would have a strong hand in guiding these region-wide investments. And again, that's 5% of each county's allocation, somewhere around $11 to $15 million a year so far. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, key performance indicators and goals. This was a core focus of the President's work group at the beginning of this year, and it comes back to that systems-based approach that we want to take from here on in. Next slide, please, Georgia. A system can only stand a chance at success if it has clear goals around which to organize and to be held accountable. We believe that we can do a much better job of being concise and precise around KPIs and goals. I think you all get this because you are leaders and decision makers, but precision and clarity are critical to help inform you so that the decisions you make will always have a starting point about where you weigh in on SHS. I think in my time at Metro and presenting in front of council for the last 3 years, I feel like we've had multiple entry points that have been somewhat confusing. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to remain grounded. What goals are we working towards? How are we measuring the health of the system? So that we can always have a starting point for these conversations where you get to weigh in and make decisions. The feedback that we've gotten resoundingly over the last almost 2 years is that it is time to update our key performance indicators and our goals. And that brings me to the next slide. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide here because we do have regional key performance indicators or metrics. And we do have regional goals that are embedded in the 2020 work plan that the then Metro Council approved. I think what we have been lacking is that precision, that clarity, and some core other key performance indicators that were not involved. So as we set about this work, we were guided really by how can we be far more precise, concise with our KPIs and goals, and what's appropriate for a regional level, as opposed to really down at the ground level. What is appropriate for us to take a bird's eye view and then hold counties accountable to meet that. I want to focus, draw your attention to that middle element there, because we're not going to dive too deep into it today, but we're going to add key environmental indicators. And I think Councillor Nolan and Councillor Gonzalez have been particularly vocal about this over the last few years. We come to Council oftentimes with quarterly reports, annual reports, and what I hear from Councillor Nolan, Councillor Gonzalez, and some of you too, is compared to what? What do these numbers mean? What is the context of these numbers? And we have an exchange wherein I often say, well, there are things we control and there's things we cannot control. I believe that we should institutionalize the KPIs that we're about to discuss with you, as well as these contextual data points as well. So for example, how many evictions are happening in a given month or a given year? What is the median rent right now? So that we are comparing the numbers that we are actually in control of against the larger environment and context, so that you as decision makers can influence those other systems. What we are in charge of, or what we contribute to and lead, I should say, is a safety net. The safety net is supposed to catch folks. We're not really there to change the upstream impacts, but we absolutely should be aware of them, and we should be factoring them into our work. And so that's what the key environmental indicators will be. We're going to move on to the next slide, please. So when we bring the work plan back to you in December, we're going to capture these actions. And I think some of them are kind of new concepts, but you're probably looking at this slide thinking this is really reductive. Well, there's a point in being reductive here, and it's trying to be concise. And at the beginning of the President's work group, there was a conversation around key performance metrics versus key performance indicators. And I'm really glad that we stuck with the I, the indicator. The indicator isn't a goal. The indicator isn't a benchmark. It's how we are tracking the key elements of a system to detect the health or the sickness within that system and how we can make adjustments. Now, when we met with Commissioner West and Commissioner Singleton, they brought up, well, this doesn't really cover treatment, or it doesn't cover positive outcomes beyond housing into recovery. Well, it is actually embedded in these pieces, and you will see that in the work plan once we submit it to you. For example, in the shelter component here, we want to measure exits from shelter. So what does a good exit from shelter look like? Well, traditionally, we want to see folks end up in stable long-term housing. Sometimes folks can be placed directly there out of shelter. Sometimes folks need treatment. They need some recovery before they are moved into shelter. We term that as a positive outcome, but we really want to see that person finally end up in long-term housing. But that's covered by shelter. Same with housing retention. What does it take to help folks retain their homes and stay in their homes? It could be getting their GED. It could be acute behavioral health interventions. So all these things are nested underneath these key performance indicators of our system. And again, in parentheses, you'll see areas where we can control them. All right, next slide, please. So speaking of goals, this is the most text-heavy slide of the entire presentation. It is deliberately text-heavy. What you'll see here is a focus on time, and you'll see a number of X's because we will continue to work with our county partners on what is feasible but aggressive to get to in the next 5 years. I expect you all to provide more feedback and deliberation over these goals. But if a system is working well, we want to see folks moved on to the next part of the continuum with some rapidity. Now, there are instances where there's a reason why somebody needs to stay in shelter a little bit longer than others. But ultimately, we want to see people moving through the system and not to shelter. So through shelter, not to shelter is one of the old maxims that we used to use. Just bringing you back to that X again. There's a reason why there is an X. We're going to fill those with numbers. And when we get to that consolidated committee next year, we are going to be presenting numbers to that committee for approval. Okay. The last thing I wanted to mention on this slide here is this interim goal. At our presentation in the middle of October and in our briefings, I've been pretty clear around the changing funding landscape and what we are being confronted with in terms of federal funding and state funding. Things have shifted differently over the last 2 years. I mean, 2 years ago, there was a lot of money flying around the system, mostly as a result of the pandemic and also the startup of SHS. We are now collectively struggling to maintain a lot of these systems that have been stood up. That's why we are going to propose an interim goal over the next 2 years of no net loss of housing capacity. The last thing we want to see are folks placed into housing only having to lose it and then return to homelessness. We've talked to our county partners on this goal. The consensus seems to be a thumbs up. Nobody has disagreed or pushed back on it yet. And so we're proposing here 5-year goals where we want to get to, and then an interim goal of no net loss. Okay. Next slide, please. So the timeline here, again, is by the end of this year, we want to embed these new KPIs and goals into a work plan for you all to approve. We keep using this acronym RSPOC, but we haven't even gotten to it yet. That's the Regional SHS Policy Oversight Committee to consider and approve the new KPIs and goals. That will be spring to summer next year. We would look to see full implementation beginning next fiscal year. Okay, next slide, please. I'll hand it over to Yesenia.
Thank you. So as Liam just discussed, these new KPIs and 5-year goals that we are exploring and unpacking with you all today, a key part of that will be how we monitor and then report out progress on that, which is this next reform concept is focused on a new regional data dashboard. Now, if we go to the next slide, a critical piece of feedback from the first years of SHS implementation is how crucial it is for Metro and SHS implementing partners to provide the region with accurate, accessible, and up-to-date information about our successes and challenges in creating and maintaining the regional homeless system of care. We currently have a dashboard on the Metro website that is reflective of the data and information that was available to us at the inception of SHS. Since then, much has changed. We now have data sets coming to us from the counties via the data sharing agreements that provide us an opportunity to visualize SHS data in a greater way than ever before. Previously, our view of the SHS data was largely static, limited to housing placements with basic demographic categories, and there was no ability to look at intersecting categories. Metro Housing Department now has updated data, tools, and staff to update and maintain a regional dashboard that clearly articulates progress in a more interactive and accessible ways. Now, if we go to the next slide. So our proposal for the regional data dashboard includes building upon the existing dashboard that we have to make regional data, key performance indicators, financial data, and progress accessible and interactive for regional leaders and the public to really help inform, make public direct decisions and how we move forward with SHS. We will use this new data dashboard as a transformative data visualization tool, offering interested parties and the public a significantly improved understanding of how SHS is impacting our community. This new dashboard can leverage better data to drill down into SHS key performance indicators and progress towards SHS goals to visualize metrics that were previously unavailable. So some examples of what the types of things that we have available to us that we didn't before is how long households are spending in SHS supported programmings, what are the types of wraparound services that come with that, and how has that supported their ability to maintain housing. Additionally, we are also able to see and track now for the proportion of households entering the shelter system, how many of them receive SHS-funded housing placements, and be able to track those retention rates or return to homelessness that those households experience in. And as you see here, the timeline for completion for this new regional data dashboard is December 2026. In the meantime, we will still have our current Metro housing data dashboard that we will do enhancements to, and we would like to further engage with you all on what are the sorts of data points, analysis that you would like to see in this new regional data dashboard that we will be building towards. Yeah, and I think the final reform concept that we just wanted to spend a little bit more time talking about today is around standards and definitions for SHS. The promise to the voters that we made to have a regional system of care can only be fulfilled if all 3 counties adhere to the same regional definitions and quality standards. It is critical that a person experiences the same quality of service across the region. People do not often confine their lives within one county, and the experiences of homelessness are not limited to jurisdictional boundaries, which is why in this reform, we're proposing to codify guidance, standards, and definitions. And in this next slide here, I'll talk a little bit more about our current state. So currently, Metro has released minimal guidance for how to implement SHS outside of the Metro SHS work plan that was codified in 2020, which served as the main guidance document until further administrative rules were developed. The Metro Housing Department has released guidance around capital expenditure usage with SHS, how we further track the 75-25 financial split requirement of the measure. And we've released this guidance via memos or emails that at times has led to unclear expectations given how counties interpret that guidance. Like with many other things under our SHS governance, we must reach agreement with all 3 counties on guidance every time we'd like to release a new definition or standard, which inevitably leads to delays in the process. Additionally, not having these clear definitions and standards for SHS has made certain oversight functions like monitoring or rolling up regional analysis really more difficult than it needs to be if we had these clear definitions and quality standards at the onset of the program. The SHS Oversight Committee also drafted recommendations last year that you all as Metro Council approved, where they urged us to develop and strengthen regional definitions, because in their role really to regionalize the data coming from each of the counties, they were having some issues with the inconsistencies that they were seeing in terms of how definitions were applied. And for the most part, in conversations with our county partners, they are in support of this reform concept. They see the need to have clarity and consistency across how definitions and quality standards are applied within our system. So in this next slide, you'll see here a little bit more about our proposal, which is to implement administrative rules that codify regional standards and definitions to strengthen consistent practices across all 3 counties. Clear, consistent definitions and standards of practice are cornerstones of successful system. Both are required to maintain validity and integrity of programs and data. Both are also required to ensure equitable service delivery across providers. Clarity and consistency in who we prioritize for services and how those services are delivered allow us to measure program effectiveness, ensure consistent adherence to proven practices, and understand and communicate progress towards goals and identify when areas need improvement. So really doing this work supports across multiple of the oversight functions that the Housing Department leads. Additionally, quality standards and definition alignment allowed for improved reporting and thus better communication with providers, participants, and the broader public. A more consistent and aligned approach to definitions and quality standards will support a more responsive and transparent system, which means that regardless of where a household is experiencing homelessness in our region and which county they entered through, they can expect the same quality of services with services that are tailored to their maybe individual needs. So on this next slide here, you'll see a little bit more about our timeline, which includes, we're currently working with our county partners to finalize a framework for how we would move forward and codify definitions and quality standards across the main SHS program areas that we fund. And then we would work into next year to adopt and finalize administrative rules for each of those areas. And we will finalize those as we go, but then we will adopt them all at once, probably looking at fall or October 2026 of next year, with counties working to start incorporating that guidance and quality standards into their implementation shortly thereafter.
I think it's my turn quickly, right? Thank you, Yesenia. This is just a table to connect all the feedback to the reform actions that we just presented on, and I'm going to hand it back in a moment to President Peterson to facilitate the discussion for council. But before I do that, I want to just mention three things. One, Commissioner Ben West of Clackamas County really impressed upon us that communicating these reforms and the goals and the KPIs in common language that is not bureaucratic is paramount, that we're able to connect what we're doing here to the general public's understanding of what needs to happen, and I take that to heart. Today's presentation is exceptionally boring. There are no pretty pictures on here. There's no kind of color or anything. It really is by the book, but that's also by design. We want you to grapple with these reforms. The other two things, should you approve the work plan, I want to remind you that we will continue to make changes as needed. Additional reforms can be taken up by the new consolidated committee if you approve that. What I'm saying is that this isn't static. Our approach to this is continuous improvement. The last thing I'll mention is that we are continuing to meet with our partners out there. So over the coming couple of weeks, we will be meeting with the Portland Metro Chamber. This afternoon, I'm meeting with Molly Hogan from Welcome Home. So we're continuing to get the feedback on these reforms, and so we'll be sharing that with you. We plan to send you a document next week, early next week, that contains a lot of the feedback that we've been receiving so far. And that's it from us for now. Next slide, please, for council discussion. Thank you.
Awesome. Councilors, if we could take one thing at a time and everybody weigh in, starting with the Regional Investment Fund and how we're proposing to move forward with that. Comments, questions, or I can just go around the table. Councilor Rosenthal?
Oh, you were good. Sure. Just a question on the Regional Investment Fund. I'm assuming you already have a preliminary list of highest priority regional investment items. I mean, having been doing this, I'm sure you, whether it's a top one would be, of course, vouchers for housing for, keeping people in housing. That could be one. Another one could be nutrition, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm assuming that's already in there, and that's just going to go through a process of winnowing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to the Regional Investment Fund, Councilor Rosenthal. When I joined Metro, I helped set up the Tri-County Planning Body and some of the framework for the Regional Investment Fund itself. And so if there are gaps in the framework, then I take responsibility for that, and I take that seriously. As we launched the Regional Investment Fund, we asked the committee to identify its regional goals as part of a regional plan, and they've identified 6 regional goals. I'm not going to list them off to you right now, but healthcare and homeless services alignment is one of them. There's been a lot of success there. Another one is landlord recruitment. And I give those two examples deliberately. I believe we need to continue funding the healthcare alignment. We're seeing results for folks with psychosis and substance use disorders already in that work. It's incredible. The landlord recruitment piece, though, is something that the counties have come back and said, we don't need goals that are calcified. We need to be responsive to emerging needs. And so we've gotten a lot of feedback in this process that when these reforms are enacted, that there's going to be some flexibility for this new committee to identify more focused investment strategies. The last thing I'll say on it is that the Regional Investment Fund is designed to improve the systems, not necessarily deliver services. And that's something we need to keep our eye on as well. Does that help?
For instance, the data collection and analysis.
Yes, of course, that included.
It's the basic one that you guys have been working on. Other questions, comments? Because I'm going to be really...
Can I just one follow-up point that always occurs to me is in Regional Investment Fund, one of the areas that wasn't specifically identified in the initial measure is services and provisions for particularly homeless youth, which is something that is addressed but is not always consistent. I'm just wondering, does that fit into something of a Regional Investment Fund activity, or is it something that can be incorporated into the mainstream process?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I think as you have seen in the Metro SHS work plan, we don't necessarily call out a lot more populations that we are targeting serving other than population A and B.
Yeah.
But I will say to the youth that are experiencing homelessness, youth are being served across the continuum in all 3 counties. There is just not necessarily targeted information that we have, but via the data reports that we're getting, especially now in the data sets that we've seen, we are learning more about ages of folks that we're serving, what type of housing services are working best for them, and how they retain housing. So even though there's not necessarily a goal, or the Regional Investment Fund isn't necessarily targeting any direct services to that population in that way, just know that they are being served across those regional goals and across the different regional systems that we have built to serve youth and other families and singles in our region.
And just to add to Yesenia's answer, I think the way that you can get at those specific populations who have specific needs is not in the Regional Investment Fund, but in the key performance indicators. So when you're asking questions to implementers around who is stuck in shelter, who's not getting shelter, and if that's youth, if it's families, then how can we improve the family system? How can we improve the youth system? So that's when we're talking about the larger health of the system. The Regional Investment Fund is that kind of steroid or injection that we can accelerate some of the systems building per se. Okay.
Councilor Vaughn and then Gonzalez.
Thank you. I understand the need for a RIF, for clear reporting and framework and deeper monitoring, but I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit more mechanically how that will work and what's different with this reform. Like, my understanding is the RIF dollars are still apportioned to 3 counties. So we're not centralizing it, but somehow there's going to be a committee that makes more regional investments that everyone just pays into. Is that what the framework will be?
Yeah, it remains an awkward relationship and an awkward scenario. But if we are able to create a framework wherein everybody has complete clarity about their roles, then we can fulfill the RIF as it was originally intended. And so, Councilor Wong, to answer your question, yes, the funds will remain at the counties in this current proposal. There's no proposal to centralize it. One of the main reasons around that is that we are looking to make fixes to SHS that can happen in a timely way. To centralize those funds back into Metro, or for the first time into Metro, would take a long time. What we want to see are regional targeted investments. And so if we are able to get or create a framework with our county partners that is far more transparent, clear, providing recommendations to this new committee, which you all will discuss in a second, and then that committee is able to provide guidance around those investments, then I think we are going to be fulfilling the full potential of the RIF as it was originally intended. But we're not currently contemplating centralizing the RIF, because I think it would just take too much time to create the impact.
Why would that take too much time?
Pardon me?
Why would centralizing it take?
Well, there are IGA negotiations and there are financial investments that the counties are currently making. So just to go into the details a little bit, we'll take that healthcare alignment goal, for example. Counties are funding FTE out of the RIF for that, for their healthcare alignment work with Metro. So to move that back into Metro, it would just take time for our financial folks to work with their financial folks to bring it back. And along the way, I just know through my own experience, hiccups happen, and before you know it, 2 years have gone by.
I guess my main concern with reforms, both for RIF and KPI, are, I think they're great ideas, but what is the accountability and consequences for not, meeting the framework or the KPIs? That's what I'm kind of struggling with. So, like, if we create a framework and
Yeah.
There is an agreement, then we haven't made any reforms, actually, right? So
I have a
where does the
version.
accountability come in?
I have a version of an answer to that question. To my mind, I don't think that we've fully utilized all the components of the intergovernmental agreements that we could have so far. I think there are elements in there that we can activate. And to be frank, I know that this council had a strong appetite for the things that you were talking about when you were considering referring a ballot measure, and I think that was some of the actions that were under consideration at the time. Without that ballot measure, it makes things a lot more difficult. But that said, I think there are things in the IGA around accountability that our oversight committee has yet to tackle. For example, a full review of the local implementation plans. That's within the authority of the IGA to make recommendations around changes in those local implementation plans. I think if we're structuring the new committee in a way that is very focused on those elements, then we get a long way to achieving what you might want to achieve. I fully believe that. We're not going to spin our wheels. That said, there is a small gap, though, around accountability that you are asking for.
Okay.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Thanks. On the RIF, I mean, I often hear from folks in my district that it's like one of the areas that Metro could be leading in for sure. And I totally affirm what I'm hearing in terms of like what feels like a puzzle in terms of who's on first, who initiates, and then obviously the TCPP goals are really solid. So I think the RIF, I'm glad that it's like it was really high up in the number of priorities. And as much as I would love to be able to centralize and truly regionalize that fund, I appreciate your approach to we are in a current measure, a race against time to deliver outcomes. And I don't know if the best use of our time is trying to relitigate those IGAs with these like 5 years. My personal position is that in a new program or an extension, centralization of the RIF will be pretty critical. That's just my own take in terms of what we re-envision. So I'm looking at this through the lens of how do we strengthen the current program, and RIF clarity on that is super important. So I agree with generally what you're sharing, the framework for action. High level question for me is, and Yesenia, you kind of alluded to some of the hard ways to measure. How much money have we collected in the like RIF, the regional RIF that is sitting with the counties? And of that, how much have we been able to deploy and invest? So like, is there money that's kind of still waiting to be deployed? And I want to be clear that my question is not being critical of the counties, because I do think that, again, that question of like who is initiating and where's the leadership coming from as we're all also building out the actual programmatic element. So I just want to get a sense of how much over the first 5 years have we collected, and I guess technically in reserves or waiting to be deployed. What does that look like?
I'll answer the last part first, and we get these numbers on a quarterly basis. Yep. So I called my counterparts the past few days just to get a scratch poll of where things are at. And basically, most of the RIF is committed at each of the counties. There's a couple of 100,000. Yeah. Okay. And most of it's committed. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been collecting somewhere in the region of $11 to $15 million a year. So not insignificant, but not a huge amount to fulfill the kind of population-specific services that Councilor Rosenthal was asking earlier. So the other piece of information I'd like to share with you, Councilor Gonzalez, and the rest of the council is that some of the feedback we're getting from a county in particular is, yeah, we're spending it out now, and we need to update these goals so we can continue spending it, because we think there's going to be a gap in the future. So this conversation, the consolidation of the committees, is timely because they are going to be looking for guidance on how to spend that funding in the future.
Thanks. Can I ask a quick follow-up? So great to hear that most of that money is committed, planned, and that the counties are working on that. So just like an example question for one of the goals, for example, the workforce question, or the healthcare question. So if there's this regional goal and there's 3 sub-funds, the 3 counties, yep, are each of the counties putting in like matching money? Or is like one county being, no, we'll take most of this goal for the region, and a different county will do, or are they just like, we have 100% of our RIF, 15% is going here, kind of like equitably across the county? How does that work?
That's a fantastic question. And it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it provides a lot of flexibility for counties to be able to respond to local needs specifically, which is a great thing. On the other hand, it's led to, in some areas, differences of investments, differences of approach towards the same goal. For example, technical assistance. 3 counties are doing it a little differently. Some counties are putting more money in, some counties are putting less money in. And so,
interesting.
there is a double-edged sword there because that flexibility, it can be crucial. For example, the healthcare alignment, I keep coming back to that because that's really the jewel in the RIF crown. But that has allowed for that flexibility. Metro has taken a leadership role in terms of convening, and it's just worked the way it was supposed to work. In other areas, not so much. What do you think, Yesenia?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that and just add that, yeah, to what you're, in terms of what you were asking, it's a combination. Depending on the goal, it's going to look differently in terms of how funds got allocated and who pays for what. And there's sometimes even a little bit of Metro front some dollars and then figuring out how to like get those funds back during the RIF. So it's like all of these intricacies that because we don't have a clearly established framework for how we both allocate and then report out, there's just like a lot of flexibility that's leading to not clearly articulating how much is in there and what the guidance is, which is why one of the pieces of the framework is to release that yearly guidance on how do each county budget in accordance to the priorities set forth by the committee.
Yeah. So this, like, I think connects back to Councilor Wong's question around the mechanics. And I'm actually really interested in this question because I think what I'm hearing is there are 6 goals and the counties can invest their slice of the RIF into those 6 goals kind of as they see fit and as they kind of interpret it. And so if healthcare integration is, the region might have an opinion, and then each of the counties is like, well, we're going to implement this in the way that we think meets the needs of our system. I think my question is then in terms of the goals that the TCPB is setting and the kind of like regional goal, is that the flexibility is important, but if everyone's kind of doing their own thing in an area of work, is that actually helping us achieve the regionalization? So I'm sure there's a balance there, but anyway, so that's my question, and I'm concerned that the reforms that we're proposing will not actually help us do the full regionalization, but they'll help us be better at it for the remainder of the program.
I agree with you, and I'll say that the flexibility that's been allowed so far has been, like I say, good on the one hand, but we've been significantly lacking in consistent region-wide investments. I think we've got one so far, the risk mitigation pool for landlords, that is run out of the Housing Development Corporation, I believe is the title of that organization. I would like to see, and I think we have to see, more consistent investments across the region. And I want to work with you a little bit more, Councilor Gonzalez, because I do believe that we are going to be creating a framework where that will be more consistent. This is a message I've shared with my counterparts. We've gone back and forth on this. We've had good debates about it, but I've been very clear that we need to see more region-wide investments. If we're going to have some flexibility, it cannot all be flexible. There has to be some balance there.
Right. All right. Thank you.
Okay, before we leave this topic, I really do need to kind of get a sense from everybody of where we are. Are we all good with moving forward with the proposal on the Regional Investment Fund to date? Hearing no.
I don't know how my peers feel, but I feel this is the best of what we can do within the framework that we have of the existing program. I think more vision and a regional system is an important conversation, but I'm not sure that we're going to be able to have that with the second half of this program. Like, that's my sense. Also, just like in the conversations that I've been able to have, I don't know if folks agree or not, and if that's the right approach and if we should be pushing harder, let's have that conversation.
Go ahead,
I don't agree that
Councilor
that's
Nolan.
the best we can do in the next 5 years. But if that's the conclusion the council makes, that it either can't or doesn't have the focus to do better, then the way it's proposed now is as good as anything else. But I continue to be distressed with the lack of urgency. Every day that it takes us to do this bureaucratic shuffle, no offense to the people involved,
None taken.
is a day that people aren't housed, people aren't served, people are living in squalor and cold and damp. I just think we need to light a fire under ourselves.
So, but my understanding is that we would have this conversation with the newly consolidated group to make sure that the goals are still the goals, and that if there's other issues, because more people will be at the table, then that would be part of the discussion going forward.
Correct, and this is an
So
18-month plan.
It's not that they're not going to change, those goals won't change. I think that there's an opportunity, but we do want to see those goals through.
We want to see those goals through, and there's opportunity for flexibility within those goals and potentially to add more goals. Additionally, this is an 18-month plan. If the conclusion of Metro Council or the committee, a year from now is something different, this isn't set in stone for the next 5 years. This is a bridge to the next step for us, is what we're proposing.
Go ahead, Councilor Rosenthal.
Yeah, I have a question. I mean, a question that Councilor Nolan brought up. I'm not getting a sense, or at least I don't get from the counties that I have contact with, that there is a lack of urgency in how they are using the regional investment funds today. We're talking about slight restructuring to have it a little bit more programmatically regional as opposed to giving them the leeway. But I don't get the sense that they are just sort of playing around with the money and not investing it or not using it in an appropriate sense. So I guess there is a potential risk in doing a restructuring that we can lose a little bit of urgency because we're going into a regional thing which nobody has quite the same commitment to as well as their local issues. So am I misreading that incorrectly? I mean, are we judging that they're just sitting on it and not doing things that are helping people?
I'm going to answer honestly that question. No, they're responding with urgency, and I would say perhaps a little too much urgency with this kind of funding. I think the 95% of their allocation is designed to be responsive to urgent needs. The money that they have, apart from the RIF, that's how they are supposed to be responding. We have seen some counties take the RIF and put it into more urgent things that are consistent with the goals, but perhaps not consistent with the intent of systems improvement. That's a different thing. And so the RIF is designed for this systems improvement, and I appreciate the folks who designed the RIF to begin with, because when it comes to homelessness, you want to throw every last dollar as fast as you can. But that sometimes is at the expense of building out robust systems. And so carving off that 5% for that regional system, I think is a wise thing to do, but that other 95% of that allocation, that's where they should be responsive to the need, the day-to-day needs, as you mentioned, Councilor Nolan.
And we haven't gotten to the governance discussion yet, but I think the point of the governance discussion is to have oversight of people who actually have implementation authority. And with all due respect to all of the folks that have contributed so much time at all of the oversight committees and the regional committee, we need elected officials holding elected officials accountable. And that's the forum we're trying to create. So when we get there, we'll get to the governance issue, but I'm a little concerned we're not making more progress. But on the RIF, I'm hearing generally that this is the right direction for now to make the next move. And then I will move on to the regional KPIs. Any questions or comments on the KPIs as proposed?
Can we put them up? You mean the RIF?
No, KPI, she's
Oh, so
segue.
we're moving on to KPIs. Okay.
Yep. I'm trying to get through this.
Yeah, of course.
Well, we don't have one of all of the KPIs.
Excuse me?
We don't have a slide for all, they were asking for the slide on the KPIs. We don't
We've
have a
got the
slide.
4 high-level categories on that slide. I can't remember which one it was.
Can we go back to that slide, Madam Chair?
Is it slide 14, I think?
There's multiple underneath each one of those, though.
Yes,
that-
there are sub-indicators, that's right.
That we
They'll
don't
be
have in
included.
front of us, but
That's right. We shared that with you in your briefings, and they'll be included in the work plan.
yeah. So are we good to proceed on those KPIs? Councilor Nolan?
The screen I would put on it is that the KPI should be framed in a way that success of the whole system, the entire regional system, needs to be a prerequisite for determining success of any part. In other words, in a regional system, we shouldn't tolerate a circumstance in which one county hits its targets, but the region as a whole doesn't hit its targets.
That's not it, Georgia. That's
And
not
I
it.
don't know if that's captured
It's
in
the
your
4.
KPIs.
It's interesting. I think there's overlap there with your suggestion, with the suggestion we received from the Portland Metro Chamber, which is we need a KPI
Imagine that.
on regional alignment. And so that is something that our staff are trying to work through. How do we capture what you are providing with, to us, Councilor Nolan, and what PMC has provided to us, which is how do you measure the health of regionalism? How do you measure the health of regional coordination? You don't see that up here right now, but that's something that we're working through.
Well, it's interesting that it comes from the chamber,
Mm-hmm.
because it's actually a pretty common framework that many businesses use in respect to bonuses and other recognitions of accomplishment. Nobody gets a bonus if the company doesn't hit its bottom line target. It's a different application here, but I can't see that we would say, if Washington County and Clackamas County succeed in serving their target population and Multnomah County doesn't, that we could consider that to be a success.
So what I would suggest at this point is, we've all seen these 4 with the sub KPIs. You're suggesting something that the system evaluation, which is actually the goals, right? The goals for the entire system are set up in the next slide, or 2 slides. Yep, there's the 5-year goals.
Part of what I'm seeking, Madam Chair, is that if Washington County has more success, or if Washington County's population split between A and B has fewer proportion of population A than Multnomah County, and I would bet dollars to donuts that it is the case, that Washington County or Clackamas County, or in some cases Multnomah County, will be incentivized to assist in ways that it can its fellow counties to reach the collective goal.
And I think that's part of the reason for changing the governance structure, is so that all of the electeds are at the table to make, because those are the only people that can make that kind of decision, to be able to talk about the system as a whole, and also what can the other counties be doing, because Clackamas and Washington County have ideas of how they can provide other services. And we just haven't gotten to that part yet, right, with the growth of the system. So I think I hear what you're saying, and I think it is baked into how we're moving forward. And so I would just say that's an umbrella comment about we need to make sure we're building a system and that the system is meeting its system-wide goals. And I don't think is there any issue with that statement? Yeah, I think we're in agreement on that.
And perhaps I can reassure Councilor Nolan, those KPIs are going to capture the things that you are looking for, the differences between counties meeting their benchmarks or goals. Again, the indicators are going to indicate the health of the system, but it's going to be up to members of this council, members of the committee in the future to set those benchmarks and then to evaluate whether the counties are hitting those benchmarks or not. But they're going to capture each county, whether they're hitting it and on a region-wide basis.
Thank you for the explanation. But that is opposite, or at least tangential to what I'm saying. We should not be just reporting on how Clackamas County did against its annual goals and how Multnomah County did against its annual goals. We should have regional goals, high-level ones, and each county will approach their portion of it with respect to their, the local characteristics of their homeless population. But I want us to be looking at reports that quarterly or semi-annually tell us how the region is doing.
That's what we're proposing here.
Great.
Yep. Good. All right. Any further comments on that? Yes, Councilor Rosenthal and then Councilor Gonzalez. Sorry, I didn't see the hands online.
Oh, I have two questions. First of all, on shelters, am I to assume that there will be, I mean, there's various different kinds of shelters. There's overnight shelters, there's long-term shelters, there's, cold weather shelters, that there's going to be slightly separate subsets of KPIs for each of the shelter types or for the range of shelters? I mean, overnight shelters, it's how many beds are used compared to how many we need, or what we're at 95% capacity and so forth. And for long-term, it's a little bit different. So that's one question. The second question I have is really on a sub-regional issue, which is it possible to have a KPI that addresses the consistency of services proportionate to the need across the different sub-regions to make sure that, and this is sort of an environmental issue too, because I mean, in some cases now people have to move across the whole region to get a certain kind of service in one area that's not available in another area. And some populations aren't very mobile, some are. The youth is pretty mobile, but the retired people or people with disabilities are much less mobile. So is it a possibility to have a KPI that shows that we're providing sub-regional consistency?
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Rosenthal, for those questions. I think on your shelter question, yes, we do have different types of shelters for different types of needs and populations, yet the data outputs or the KPIs that we would collect, things like shelter entries, exits, placements, utilization rates, length of stays, all of those would be the same types of information that we would collect for all the different shelters that we would serve. And then we could analyze that based on the different types of shelters and the populations that they're intended to serve in terms of like the success and placements at a shelter into housing. But the core data outputs remain the same across the different shelters. Now on your second question, I will just note that all of the updated KPIs and goals that we see here, these are reform concepts and changes in addition to the goals and KPIs that we currently have that will hold. So some goals will be sunsetted, right, because we have reached them or because they no longer apply. But we are currently tracking a KPI that informs us how inflow is coming into our system. So even though you don't see that here clearly articulated, that would continue to be a KPI that we would track, the inflow and outflow. So the entries into people experiencing homelessness and the exits of people being placed into housing, and doing analysis in terms of that. Those more environmental factors that Liam raised earlier, and those KPIs that maybe we don't have as much control of, but they are just as important in terms of painting a picture for how the success that we're seeing at SHS within the broader context in the region.
Okay. I'm going to go Councilor Simpson, since you haven't weighed in quite yet on stuff, so go ahead, and then we'll come back to Wong and Gonzalez.
Thank you, President Peterson. I appreciate that. And as I'm thinking about the KPIs, if we roll back to like the higher overarching themes, I'm thinking more so around a few things, but I think down the vein that has come up consistently for me, and that is like, how do we right size the right services in the right areas? And so like, I'm really thinking about like permanent supportive housing, those folks that are gonna, like, we know need help for the rest of their lives, 24/7, round the care, we don't have a whole lot of that right now. Where do we need it? Where do we need it most? How do we direct those funds and say we're meeting our indicators? Y'all have any thoughts about that?
I do. Thank you for the question, Councilor Simpson. To my mind, as long as I've been in this work, we've never had a public conversation with leaders around the appropriate investments in different parts of the continuum to create the best system possible. What we've had are conversations around, we need a lot of money in shelter, or we need a lot of money in housing, and then it becomes housing versus shelter. Instead of a conversation around, if we put this much money allocated to shelter and this much towards housing, then people are going to move through shelter into housing. I would love to see that conversation happen in this new committee, because then we're actually talking about systems.
A full system. Right.
Exactly. And
Because I'm looking at this, on this sub-bullet on the first one, it says family reunification treatment, right? Like, these are places for folks to go, but what if there is no reunification or enough space?
Yep.
Like, what are we doing with folks? And so, like, that's, for me, I'm like, how do we solve for that?
Yeah, thank you for, I think the way I interpret your question is you're focusing in on the bits between shelter and housing, for example. So what we really want the system to focus on are people's individual needs. What do they need in order for long-term stability? So if it is family reunification, then great. But honestly, I don't want to see people going back to families that kicked them out for their identity and they're escaping that. Like, we need to figure out what the appropriate placement is. If it's treatment, or if it's straight to housing and they need a job or workforce training. And I think those investments between each of those continuum points are just as important as the continuum points themselves. As to your question around permanent supportive housing, well, that's probably the most expensive investment that we make. It's one of the main reasons we passed the SHS measure to begin with. But we should not be thinking about these things as binary. This is a holistic system. We should be thinking about the best system we can create with the money that we have, is my opinion. So thank you for the question.
Right, because listen, there's treatment, and then there are facilities to take care of folks from perpetuity. And that's what we're talking about in my mind here. Is like, treatment means somebody can be rehabilitated back into society and they can take care of themselves and do whatever it is they need to do for their lives. Permanent supportive means that's it. And the state or the government is caring for them in perpetuity. And we need to have that honest conversation if that is the case for folks.
And I think that conversation has to happen alongside other institutions as well that we're not responsible for. Because if other institutions are depending on PSH, then they're depending on the wrong intervention for that person. So for example, long-term behavioral health care might not be PSH if it's consistently acute. That's just one example. Older adult care, for example. We have to have that conversation within the larger context, I think. I agree with you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Councilor Wong.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. And, I appreciate the need for KPIs. I think that's really important. But KPIs are only as valuable as the ability to make change to meet them. And with the RIF and for the KPIs, I think we're structurally set up in a way that if we don't meet our KPIs, there's no real change. Like, I think what Councilor Nolan is talking about is like 80% of the houselessness crisis exists in one county. We're not going to meet our KPIs unless we have the ability to shift resources around to where the needs are most acute, and we're just not structured to do that. I could be wrong, but like, what is your, like, why do we have ambitious KPIs if we know we can't actually shift anything?
Just to be clear, I think the goals will be ambitious. The KPIs are just what will be monitored for the health of the system. And I agree with you that the responsiveness to those KPIs is limited, but limited because of limited in funding. Even though SHS is significant, it still has limitations. And then to your point, Councilor Wong, limitations in governance as well. I know President Peterson is anxious to get to the next point because I think there are going to be answers to some of your questions in the governance conversation that's going to happen next. But we can't change the limitations that we're under. That's right.
Okay.
Councilor Gonzalez.
Yeah, this is a really good conversation. Can't remember who said it when the presentation was happening, but if we don't kind of update or refresh, we run this risk of like misalignment and misdirection in terms of people trying to be urgent and responding to the need. And like, I went back on our website just to confirm this, but like the original 10-year goals, like we have to be good. We've met those goals, and people broadly, the region feels like the system is not working and we have not fixed it, right? And so I think fix the issue, I should say. And so I do think that like this 5-year framework to me makes a lot of sense. And again, I'm going to keep egging on this subject that like this, we are working within the within the construct of what we have, right? And I think that's important to really think about some of these fundamental changes that we're talking about, that we want to see. We tried to have a conversation about what it would take to do that, and that required an electoral decision from the voters. And we all determined, as a council, all of us here, that there was no feasible path to do that, right? And so I think, I just want to like ground us back into that shared decision, and that decision was then connected and baked into, well, then let's improve what we have and deliver as much results as possible. So I think, yes, is it the most transformative SHS reform? Jury's out on that. Is it effective, incisive, and is it going to help set us up for more collaborative success? Yes, and I see that happening. So the original 10-year goal was 5,000 households placed into housing, 10,000 people stabilized at risk. We've done 9,000 people into housing and almost 20,000 people that have been stabilized from homelessness. So it's almost double of what we said we would do in 5 years, not 10 years. And the question is, were those the right goals? Right. So I think, again, this 5-year framework is really sharp. The regional indicators, I appreciate that. And I just kind of wanted to add my own thoughts as we go forward. But I think these are really, really sharp. And I'm assuming would require approval from this new oversight committee, but absolutely the oversight structure is the most important place for that culture change to happen. And again, we're going to have a conversation about what a new program looks like eventually.
Thank you. Back to Councilor Simpson, and then we'll move on to.
Quickly, as I look at these and I think about this and I'm thinking about the funding, and I'm glad we hit all these goals. I'm glad you brought that up. I think, as I think about it though, were those goals met with funding added to this SHS pot? Because now we're moving into these next 5 years. We know we're not getting a big commitment out of the state. Mm-hmm. We know we're not getting a big commitment out of the feds. So what is it? How can we really impact these KPIs knowing that we lost those two big major funding sources? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I mean, I think what I can note is that in the 5,000, 10,000 progress that you see reflected on our website, that is most of those progress is attributed to SHS funds. Now, is there leverage funded for like different programming? So like at the beginning of the program, 2020, 2021, when we had a lot more federal funds via ARPA and all these things that support how we got to those numbers in eviction preventions and homeless preventions, absolutely. But for the most part, as we worked with the counties to develop methodologies for how we attributed success, we did quantify the number of SHS funded into a program when we talked about the outcomes for that. So that does give you a pretty good view of what the success that we had only with SHS. But now I think the second part of what I was hearing your question describe is that, yes, we will, in this federal and state funding landscape shift, there is less funds, so there is less dollars to braid funds and match SHS dollars to that. And I do think that we will see an impact of that moving forward in these next 5 years. I think that the jury's still kind of out in terms of how much of an impact that will be. But I would say, like, I don't think that we will be able to, like, match SHS in the community and in the region in the same way we did in the first 5 years.
Which, that makes me question, how bold can we be? Considering we know we have this limited amount of money. Like, we have to be very strategic about and prioritize what we actually want to do. Because, again, we went from 3 funding sources, now we're down to 1 single and some partials here and there. Right? So how bold can we be, Liam?
That's 100% right. That's why we're proposing 5-year goals and an interim goal. The interim goal is reflective of this dynamic landscape that we're in and prioritizing folks who've been placed into housing from homelessness who are currently there funded by SHS, which is another issue because that's a lot of money ongoing that's captured in those homes. It's a separate issue. But we also do want to be ambitious. I think we're obligated to be as ambitious as possible, and the possible piece is really important. Again, that's why we put up X's there. We want to push our county partners to tell us what's feasible and what we can be ambitious about over the next 5 years. Kind of right-sizing the system, as you mentioned. But frankly, Councillor Simpson, being bold in these times right now, it's a matter of maintenance is being bold right now for a lot of our folks out there. And trying to capture what we already have and not going back.
Yeah.
It's a really good point, thank you. All right, so I'm hearing basic agreement around the regional investment fund, the regional KPIs, data dashboard, obviously updating that based on what we've got coming out, and moving through the new governance, which we're gonna get to, and administrative rules. Any issue, question, comment on the dashboard or administrative rules? I think the administrative rules is going to be really where the accountability discussion starts to kick in that Councillor Wong brought up, so. Okay, can we move on to governance? Okay, Liam.
Okay, we're going to
Thank you.
zip through these next few slides, and these slides do not include various scenarios for potential hypothetical committees. What they do include is some feedback we've received, some overlap that we've captured from our briefings with you, and then we're going to take a step back for you all to have a discussion about this. So we're going to move through these slides pretty quick. Next one, please. Next one. Next one. Thank you. We're just laying out here the need. We've talked to you about this an infinite number of times, so we are actually going to skip this slide since you've heard about it ad nauseum. We're proposing to consolidate the responsibilities of the Tri-County Planning Body and the SHS Oversight Committee into one body. That would mean that both of those committees that we currently are working with would need to be sunsetted at some point. We're planning on launching this regional SHS Policy and Oversight Committee in springtime. I do want to, even though we're pressed for time, I want to say how absolutely grateful I am to every member of those committees. They've spent hours and hours of their time trying to improve the system, and they've made a big difference in the first 5 years. And I'll let them know when we meet with them too, but just want to share with you all how valuable they've been in providing input into this process. Next slide, please. So this is where we've seen some areas of alignment, an expanded membership to include additional elected officials, that this would be an ongoing process to review how effective the committee is. So Metro Council, we're proposing after a year of activity, Metro Council would review the effectiveness of this committee. We understand that there's large consensus potentially. I'm determining that. I'm making sure I'm looking at our attorney. I'm determining that. Consensus around a Metro Councillor being chair of the committee. And then obviously Metro Housing Department staff would be responsible for providing any kind of staffing for this committee, much in the same way that we do now, much in the same way planning staffs JPAC and MPAC and so on, and ensuring that you councillors are kept in the loop more intimately than you have been. Next slide, please. Interestingly, or not surprisingly perhaps, in the folks that we've talked to, a lot of elected officials that we've spoken to would like to see more elected representation. A lot of community leaders we've spoken to would like to see more community leader representation, SMEs the same, and so on and so forth. Counties would like to see more county representation. Cities would like to see representation. You know all this. But this is what the feedback is that we've gotten from different folks. But I think the one thing where I believe I can still have an opinion on, and that is having representation across the region is incredibly important for this work. We've seen it work at the TCPB, especially at the TCPB, where we have representation from different folks all across the region weighing in on local issues to inform a regional vision. And I've seen it work personally at the TCPB. And that's all I'll say, because I know President Peterson's anxious to get to this conversation, so thank you.
One last thing, Liam, just for background, you said, you didn't mention that, I think that there was consensus on the size of the committee?
Just expansion.
Just expansion?
Yeah, an expansion to include more elected officials.
Okay. All right, so as we go through the issues before us, I really just want to go down the line on each one of these to make sure everybody's got a voice in all of these. And the first issue is the number of Metro councilors on the committee. I think my original proposal was 3, similar to JPAC and MPAC. I'd like to just hear from all of you on that topic. So why don't we start with Councilor Wong and go down and come back to Simpson.
This is for Metro councilors?
Number of Metro councilors on the committee.
Yeah, I think minimum 3, and I'd actually entertain all of us.
And rationale for that?
You know, I think that the representation that JPAC has been working in that, you know, sector of work. But I do think, you know, over the next 18 months, having the whole council really lean in makes some sense to me as well. Like, I'd like to set the stage with the right framework, and that takes all of us, and then maybe revisit it in the future.
How do you view that with the concurrence model that's been proposed? So that there has to be a concurrence between the full Metro Council, so you're involved that way as a council as well.
Yeah, I think. And that's like kind of creating a bicameral model.
Yep.
I think that could work longer term, but I think in the short, intermediate term, having us all there and actually one place makes sense. Because I do think we learn a lot from being in conversation, not just with ourselves, but with, you know, other electeds and practitioners.
How do you feel, how would you respond to the counties in saying, well, then we want all 5 commissioners from each county being on?
That we would like, what, sorry?
How would you respond to each county then when they say, well, we want all 5 counselors on it or commissioners on as well? I'm just predicting the conversation down the road. Because I know that if, as chair of Clackamas County, if I heard the whole council, I'd be like, well, then, right?
Well, I think it's our committee and we can set it up in the way that we think is most.
No, but I'm like the rationale. I mean, there need to be a justification to say back, this is why.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting thought, though, of how do we engage everybody? And if concurrence isn't the way, then how do you? And then I think the question would be voting or non-voting, which is the second part of the question. But I kind of wanted to just get the number of counselors on the table. That's what we're talking about, and we're going around, and we'll come back to you. Councilor Rosenthal.
Well, first I'm confused because Councilor Huang was speaking and the screen kept saying it was me, but I wasn't saying anything. So that had me quite confused there for a minute. So I'll just defer to Councilor Huang. He said, no. I think I've made my position fairly clear in the past. I don't see a particular need for 3 Metro councilors on the committee. I would rather spread the wealth, and in the long term, I think there's probably going to have to be 2 committees, but that's not in the interim. I think 2 committees because you have interest groups and stakeholders and that are not elected officials, and you have elected officials and they have very different perspectives. So I mean, in the long run, I would have a 3-tiered structure. The reason I don't think Metro needs 3 on is because all major decisions will come back to Metro anyhow. Unlike JPAC, our funding, this is funded through Metro, whereas JPAC has many sources of funding. There's local funds, there's county funds, there's state funds and federal funds, and we're more of the arbiters, and it's so more important to have as a regional transportation planning agency, it's more important to have a strong voice. In this case, we will always retain a strong voice. So that would be my basic thinking on this as to whether, you know, they want all the commissioners. It's a tricky problem because there's a lot more elected officials than you can put on one committee if you wanted to put all the county commissioners in all the city. And then the other harder problem is Portland is obviously it's the big dog in the area. They have a larger percentage of both the problem as well as population. to what extent do they deserve some extra representation? Because
So if we could just keep it to Metro Council for now, and then we'll come back around, that would be very helpful.
Pardon?
If we could just keep it to the Metro Council participation,
Oh, okay,
if just focused for now, I'm trying to get through and voting or non-voting, so
okay. One
and voting or non-voting.
One and what?
Voting or not voting.
Oh, I think one, but voting in the case of ties.
Okay.
In other words, a deal breaker, like,
And just to clarify, the only money that flows through JPACT is the federal money that comes through ODOT. So just like with the homeless service measure, the local money, the state money does not come, it does not come through. You don't get to make decisions about local decisions, so.
I'm not sure I get your point.
JPACT is not structured the way that you had discussed. So I just wanted to clarify for the record that when JPACT makes a decision, it's not making a decision on local money. Local money might be in a project, but the money being distributed and the money being discussed is not
Right, yeah.
county and city money. So JPACT does not get to say where the cities get to spend their money or how counties spend their money. And in this case, we're talking about how the money that flows through Metro for SHS is spent, not how the counties spend their federal money.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's.
QED.
I just wanted to clarify. Okay, Counselor.
Thanks. Just doing a little meditation there. In terms of Metro, I think at a minimum, we need to have 3 counselors. I'm a big fan of the JPAC model and the way that there's like a TPAC subcommittee structure that creates space for experts to feed decisions, the checks and balances that exist between JPAC and Metro Council. But the reason that we need 3 Metro counselors is to make sure that, it's a Metro program and Metro leadership is essential into that. And I don't think it's responsible for us to abdicate our leadership to and not show up in that way. So I would just say that 3. I could be persuaded potentially for a conversation into a 7, but we don't have the capacity with a part-time council. And I think if we were to do a 7, it would be more in terms of like the way that counties do their like housing authority, right? They kind of step into a different oversight structure. You can add new people and things like that, but I don't think that this is specifically, I actually don't know if that plays in terms of what we're doing here. So I think, again, 3 is where I'm really, really leaning towards, but certainly more than 1.
3 voting.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I believe one counselor needs to be the chair as well.
Thanks.
My comments will reflect a little bit what Councilor Wong referred to, and that is a bicameral approach. I'm not recommending we have 2 committees, but I would be comfortable with a presence, an opportunity to participate and discuss and ask questions done on a sort of Senate basis. So the counties, even though they're different populations and different homeless populations, each have valid perspectives that ought to be brought. But voting should be done on a House of Representatives basis, based on the homeless population in the jurisdictions that are at the table.
Okay, so that's a good overall comment.
We don't have to have just one person, one vote. There are other examples where votes are cast proportionately.
So if I could try and break that down in terms of your thought process for how this should work, the number of Metro Council representatives voting would be 1?
No.
1 to every, I'm trying to figure out, because I don't know what that means, Senate, blah, blah, blah. I don't, that doesn't compute for me.
So the total membership of the committee, and I know you want to focus on Metro, but the total composition of the committee should be based on what expertise and voices we want participating in the conversation.
And we're going to get to
everyone
that.
who's a member of the committee has equal access to ask questions, make points, present cases. But if and when the committee actually votes on decisions, that voting would be assigned based on the proportion of homeless people each member is serving.
So is there, I want to make sure.
And it would, I
If
don't
we-
want to do the arithmetic here about how we do that. It's easiest to do with the counties, right? Because we know the pit count by county. So.
But to get to the crux of the question you've put on the table, I think I need head nods, because otherwise we have to pursue that conversation if there's enough head nods to make representation based on the number of homelessness within that jurisdiction. So do I have head nods?
The voting, not the.
Voting.
Not the attendance on the committee.
Do we want to pursue that thought? Because if we don't, then we can move on. If we do, then we need to talk about that.
I think it's worth the convo.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I think it's worth the conversation.
So what would that look like? Since the counties right now, through the measure, have a split of money, what's raised in the county stays in the county. How would that affect the voting then?
Do we want a regional system or not?
Is that a regional system, though? When one county would get more weighted votes or more votes based on
The responsibility it has,
well,
what we're asking it to perform. Yep.
Councilor Rosenthal?
Can I ask a question? I'm a little confused here. If we would adopt something like that voting system, how would Metro have any votes? Because all the homeless people are already represented by the counties. It would be double representation. I guess I don't see how that would give Metro any votes.
I'm confident that.
And then the representatives.
Other than in the long run, all decisions would come back to Metro anyhow.
And it's a good point, because then the representatives that are not elected wouldn't have a vote.
I have not done the algorithm, but I think it is likely pretty straightforward for smart people to figure out how we achieve that objective, which reflects the stake each government has in producing solutions here, and respect for the proportion of the burden that we collectively are asking them to shoulder.
Councilor Gonzalez?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a scenario in which I would support a weighted voting system based off of some kind of quota or count around the population. I think it could result in perverse outcomes, like, so then do people then want to increase the number of people that are some specific data point so that they then have more power at this regional table? Not that that would happen, I just don't, I doubt that that's one of the best practices that we've learned in looking at what other regions are doing to address this. So I don't think I'm there on that.
Councilor Simpson, did you have a comment on this concept?
So I think, this is a really good discussion. Look, it's the Metro SHS measure, so we need to have a clear presence at the table. I'm down for 3 with all 3 voting with the chair. I don't know about the weighted system, because I think that kills the spirit of the regionalism of what it's meant for. Now, that's not to say the investment shouldn't be there, but it shouldn't be a weighted vote, right? Like if the discussion comes on the floor that there's more gaps in services in Multnomah County, then we have that discussion and we vote towards it, but as a collective. But I don't see weighting it per individual because of where they sit.
Yeah, I feel pretty uncomfortable with just the concept. I'm trying to apply, how would we do that if we were to do that on transportation or land use? So it would be whoever had the most population on land use and whoever had the worst congestion on we all have different issues around the same topic. And to say that we're going to organize ourselves around voting around one portion of it, just by the sheer number, but not the actual problems and the outcomes that we're trying to get, I think I would rather not go down that road. But if the council wants to see a scenario put on the table, then we should, I'm going to need enough thumbs up to do that. I'm not seeing any thumbs, so are we not pursuing it?
This goes beyond metro representation on there.
Yes, I'm trying to make sure that I understand whether we want to pursue it and ask staff to come back with something, or if not.
But I can't be comfortable with a setup that gives equal weighting, because if you don't weight votes, you have weighted them, it's a 1-to-1, to people representing very small, close-knit communities who never go to downtown Portland and have a hostility to the people who sleep there outdoors or live there in, homeowner-owned housing. I don't think we'll solve the regional problem if we don't pay attention to the people who are on the street every day trying to fix it.
And while I hear you, I'm trying to discover if the council wants to pursue the concept. If you want a scenario brought back, we can ask for a scenario to be brought back, but we need the council to weigh in on that. And we need at least 4 people to want to do that. Otherwise, we'll continue to go through what we think the right representation is from these groups. Because this is an umbrella concept that we need to have come back. Go ahead, Councilor.
Madam President, my recommendation would be to go through the rest of the conversation and see if we're able to achieve our shared goals, through that conversation. And then if they don't, then explore other options. But
Okay.
I'd like to have the whole conversation first.
Okay, sounds good. But I just want to make it clear, I'm hearing you. I just want to make sure we've got enough behind it to be able to pursue it. Okay. County representation. What are we thinking there? What we had discussed prior to this was at least 1 from each county voting. How does that sit? And again, we heard the counties would like more. Yeah.
I would just like for us to consider and maybe have some advice from our attorney on real and perceived conflicts of interest. In the current setup, the counties are our only recipients, so I believe they should have a voice, but also to me that seems like a direct conflict. So I don't know how to think through that, and then it's really important to me for frontline experts also to have a voice, but they're also recipients, but more downstream. So what would be a good legal analysis way to think about how we manage conflicts that are both direct, like one funding relationship, and then downstream?
Councilor Huang, thank you for the question. For the record, Carrie McLaren, Metro Attorney. I'm going to divide your question a little bit because I think there's conflict of interest in terms of Oregon ethics law, Metro Code, and our policies really relates to an individual pecuniary benefit or avoidance of cost to themselves as an individual. And so you have those elements. And then I think what you're also really driving at is this sense of impartiality as well. Can they be objective, impartial in looking at a regional, looking at a regional program and the regional delivery of services? I think is really your question. And I would say maybe it weighs more on that latter half. I think there are different ways that the council could approach this. Again, maybe with thinking of voting versus non-voting, representation is one way to affect that, where you want voices to be heard, but you don't want them to be in the decision-making role. So that's the first example of how I would recommend council think about that. And my office could work with housing to think of a few other models to address those issues that you've raised.
We had also talked about providers being part of a technical committee that would be supported by staff. So that would be one way, and they could report back on a quarterly basis on what they're seeing, what they're feeling. And then they're not on the committee and they're not voting.
And that's the same way of making sure that those, I guess actually just to sort of repeat and underscore what Council President Peterson said, those technical advisory committees can be a place where you hear the information is presented, advice, given, but decisions not part of the decision-making process. And that can help to address concerns both around conflicts of interest as well as sort of impartiality and objectivity. There are other ways that you can go, but that's part of the place.
And what you're saying is county representatives as voting members actually don't have a direct conflict themselves.
So for the counties, as our funding model is established now, Councillor Huang, for the most part, and conflict of interest questions, I don't mean to punt this, but I'm just going to really want to raise that very fact specific in terms of what is the actual decision that's before that county. So if right now in most of our supportive housing services measure, we have allocations that are established, by code and by our IGAs, and they don't differentiate based on what other decisions are made. So they get an allocated share. And in that sense, you don't have a benefit that may inure to the counties. It also is going to depend upon what that county commissioner's compensation structure is, in terms of those analyses. So I just want to raise for you that I think it's both a conflicts of interest question potentially, but also an objectivity and partiality. And that's one of the issues we've really faced in some of these oversight committees. And I think they are both issues, but separate.
And I think when I, consider this, I think the county should have a say, but we have to recognize that they have multiple interests that they're balancing, the need and want for us to build a regional system and maximizing revenue to their own county to represent their constituents. So I think that's a balancing act, and I think we balance that by actually having multiple voices where we can all come together and make those decisions. But that's just my opinion.
And of course, in those actual conflict of interest or potential conflicts of interest, my office can advise both the body and they can seek, the individual person can seek advice as to whether or not they should, just make that conflict known, or whether or not they need to recuse themselves from both the discussion and the decision.
So we're running out of time. To get through all of the issues here. And I guess just to finish out the county representation, because I do think that that's a good question, I would defer back to staff to come back on a recommendation on that. But in terms of if voting or non-voting, we can set that aside for now. How many representatives from each county would you want on there, one or two? Or all of them?
One.
We can come back with the voting versus non-voting, but
3 from Multnomah County, 1 from the other 2.
okay.
1 for each county.
I would lean toward 2 from Washington and Clackamas and 3 from Multnomah.
2, 2, and 2.
2, 2, 2, 2. Councilor Wong, did you have a specific number in mind?
I'd start at 1 for each.
One?
One for
Okay,
each.
sorry, I just didn't hear you. Okay. We do not have consensus on that yet. but I think having some more information about voting, non-voting would be helpful, and we'll come back to that. In terms of the rest of this, we've got cities, subject matter folks, specific coalition representation, such as business, NGOs, that sort of thing, state elected officials, State Department officials, and the idea of concurrence with the Metro Council that we talked about. Those are still kind of outstanding issues that we need to go over. Anything that anybody wants to add at this point of like, you're very interested in seeing blank from those? You're very interested in having state legislative folks attend, you're very interested in having state department heads attend, that sort of thing. So out of those, can we just go back around, and if you can kind of keep in mind, it was city, subject matter, specific coalition representation, state electeds, State Department officials, and the concurrence.
So are you asking for state?
Just overall, what do you think on those in terms of what you want to see the staff come back with a recommendation on?
Like a number? Or am I concurrence with the group of people you outlined? Is that what you're asking?
This is a lot to take on in one question, so thank you.
Yes.
What we had originally kind of put out there was two, just like JPAC from each, two cities from each county, two city representatives from each county, not two cities, two city representatives from each county, that we would, and I don't remember how many.
JPAC only has one city per county,
And an alternate?
but the
It's
alternates don't
MPAC.
attend.
It's
at the
MPAC
table.
that has two. MPAC has two.
Potentially. Yeah.
Huh?
No, yeah, I was gonna say potentially.
Yeah. No, it does. That's what the reference was. It was to two, because the cities were feeling like they had been left out, so the proposal I put forward was two. Any thoughts? Yeah, because I
think
believe they did not feel that that was enough. Is that correct, Liam?
That's right.
They did not feel two was enough.
I think it's a practical question in some sense. How many big cities do we have that really have a big stake in this process and that need to be regional partners? Two from each county covers most of that. If you have two from each county and then one other chosen, you cover most of that. And these communities have quite a stake. Some of them provide other services, at least the larger cities do.
I will say, and two for me, and I said two previously because a couple of things, because I think about Multnomah County, like Multnomah County doesn't even think of itself as a whole. It's East Multnomah County, right? And so like for me, I think about like.
And that city of Portland in two?
Right.
Yep.
Because it wouldn't be fully, our voices aren't really captured in conversation when the conversation is Multnomah County at large, right? But the reality is Multnomah County is split. There's the core and then there's the east side. And that representation has to be there.
Thoughts?
Biggest criteria for me is, I'll use Carrie's term, impartiality, or I would frame it as regional perspective. A capacity to look at, a capacity and a commitment to look at the entire responsibility for the region and the opportunities and challenges from a regional perspective. And that can come from the different categories you mentioned, but I don't think it's inherent in any of them. That's what's missing in the way we're identifying this. We need people here who will sit down and say, this is working, let's all follow that model, or I'm struggling to deliver on our part, I need help. And I don't think this composition proposal addresses it. It also doesn't represent representation, and I can't support something that's not representative.
Gotcha. Counselor Gonzalez?
One city per county, and then the city of Portland has a seat. Again, I think the JPAC model is good. So it'd be City of Portland, and then each county gets a city of that county, so Multnomah County would have 2 cities. Acknowledging that the City of Portland is almost a $10 billion agency that is also the hub of the experience. I don't know if that would address some of the concerns around kind of the core of the region or not, but I think it's fair. And the reason that I'm concerned about potentially, doing additional city plus additional county folks is at the end of the day, this committee will need to be regional. That's what the 3 Metro councilors are doing. And if we do 2 county commissioners plus 2 city people for each county, then you have 6 county commissioners and 6 city people and then 3 Metro people. And then so there is like the balance of decision-making is very out of weight in terms of the regional perspective, which is why I think the JPAC model was designed to try and address that balance of the Metro perspective is the regional perspective, which is why I think we should have 3. And then each of the counties and cities bring that perspective.
Okay, thank you. What I'm hearing right now is that we need to come back with a proposal, a couple proposals. One that has 3 counselors, 1 county, and 7 total cities. So 1. You said 1.
Say that
Yeah.
again. You said
I'm sorry, I'm trying to get to a total here because I want to ask the question.
Maybe it was 4 total cities.
Maybe I'll just ask the question this way. When we look to the other types of representation, we're going to have all these different types of representation. Do you want it to be a balanced elected to the others? Or do you want it to be 1 less so that the electeds are, like, how do you want that balance to go? Or do you just want those who are not elected to be non-voting? Just give me a sense of that. Balanced, not balanced, where would you weight it? Expertise versus elected, and, Councilor Wong.
My preference would be for a balanced approach. I do think having the provider and other expertise is extremely valuable. And I think actually having that place where expertise meets political representation is important. Electeds are accountable to the people. But, honestly, I got elected and didn't know a lot about this. It doesn't mean that you're elected means that you know what you're doing. So having that expertise, all together, I think makes the most sense and also guards more against the direct self-conflicts of interest.
And with that balance, do you want it voted balanced as
Yes.
well? Okay. Councilor Rosenthal?
Yeah, just a couple comments. First of all, when you have elected officials, of course, you have an a priori assumption that they have some balanced interest because they've been elected by a majority or a plurality of the people. But you can never guarantee that. People have different kinds of perspectives and different kinds of interests. That's particularly true in Metro because we represent very different districts. So you can't assume. It's always a little bit, as I've said once before, it's like a box of chocolates. You get them together and you make sure there's an odd number of candies and hope the vote goes the right way, but you're going to have to readjust at some point because you can't really guarantee how people are going to think about things, different positions and different opinions here. And I just want to make one other comment about the JPAC model. The JPAC model is great in many regards. However, I would say from the standpoint of somebody who's not on JPAC, I get no feedback on what's going on in JPAC unless I sit in on the meetings. It's a problem of communication we have within the Metro Council. There has been no great structure to communicate the kinds of things that are going on in some of these committees to the rest of the council so that they remain equally informed. And I would worry that would be the same thing true with housing. There would get to be 3 Metro councilors who would have primary influence and the rest would not. And that may be good, may not be good.
So I believe we have upcoming retreats to talk about issues such as that. And there's obviously ways in which we've tried to communicate decisions and upcoming decisions, and not everybody hears information in the same way. So it'll be good to have that conversation about communication, no matter what the structure is, and regarding all of our committees. And, you know, we're trying to balance, again, I think Councilor Gonzalez or Councilor Wong had said, trying to balance the amount of interest in being on these things versus the actual amount of time that you're able to spend doing it as not a full-time council. So I hear you, and let's make sure we get that acknowledged in the retreat discussion, but not necessarily right now, because we have 10 minutes to get through the rest of this. So I'm hearing that you're okay with a balanced approach in the representation between electeds and non-electeds. That's what I'm trying to get out of your comments. If I'm not correct, let me know.
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, a balanced approach. What do you mean by balanced approach? Yes, I believe in a balanced approach
You're not trying to weight it either way.
in terms of
Roughly equal numbers of elected
roughly
and
equal numbers,
non-electeds.
although I do believe that Portland and Multnomah County have need to be perhaps a little bit more proportionally represented.
So the question was between elected and non-elected. So,
Oh, between elected and non-elected, I've said I think eventually you're going to need two different groups.
okay, so on the committee, I'm assuming that you're for a balanced approach based on what you've said. If that's not correct, say yes or no.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Gonzalez.
I just want to be really clear on JPACT. Almost every presentation that JPACT receives, the Metro Council receives in a work session. So I just want to be clear that folks have access to that opportunity. I mean, JPACT is its own committee, and there are pros and cons to that, but work sessions, information, the council is a key decision maker in that due to the kind of checks and balances that exist. So I just want to say that. For me, I lean towards more representation in the elected decision makers that are ultimately accountable to the voters and the people. And I think most of the interest groups, the service providers, the experts, spend a lot of time trying to inform and educate decision makers. But that being said, I do think that we should have state departments, I don't know, OHCS, for example, we should have coordinated care groups that help facilitate the health insurance and health programs market, things like that. And then the number, I can't tell you exactly how many, but I do think some service provider representation and perspective, whether that's coalitions that represent service providers or actually SHS contracted service providers, I'm open to conversation, but I do think having a service provider lens or an expert lens or academia lens as it relates to the subject is important, and I think that they should be voting members.
And if they're directly getting money from the SHS, would they be non-voting?
I'm open to a scenario proposal, right? Because I'm on the fence.
Okay.
I'm on the fence. I think that they bring a critical and valuable perspective because they have to live with the decisions that we make and can help us understand what it's actually like to be boots on the ground. But for example, is it X provider that is managing Tiny Home Village Y down the street, or is it an association of providers that kind of feeds, that can kind of represent the provider perspective? I can't tell you because I'm not the expert. I do think that perspective should be there. I think that there's pros and cons. But I would probably right now, if you really, what you're asking me to make a decision, I would probably lean more towards coalition representation rather than a specific provider perspective. And when I say a specific provider, I mean one organization that is contracted to do one element of work, because even one organization is not going to have a full perspective on the full spectrum of the continuum of care and the continuum of housing. So that's why I'm leaning towards regional, broad-based thinking, regional decision-making. There's coalitions that do that. OHCS, the continuums of care.
So like Welcome Home, Here Together.
Those are existing players. I mean, there could be a new players that come on.
Not
but
that they
like-
would get a seat, but that's who would be eligible.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, just wanted to try and give you some direction as to where I am.
Just because we've never done that in the past, I would highly encourage us not to say it's for a specific thing, but to say these are the types of people who are eligible.
Yep.
Thank you. Councilor Nolan?
I'm inclined toward a balanced composition in terms of voting. I would exclude from eligibility anyone associated with an organization that receives funding directly or indirectly through a county. And I like Councilor Gonzalez's idea of turning instead to association representation of those perspectives. We do have a technical advisory committee, and I think the people at the direct service delivery area probably more appropriately sit at that table. And again, as important to me as the categories is the regional perspective. And maybe it's true that state agencies would help bring that regional perspective.
Thanks. Councilor Simpson?
Balance, just for the sake of time. A balanced approach. I like coalitions at the table. I like the help. I don't know if there's a bucket or a lane for healthcare providers to be able to speak in that space as well. And yeah, I'll just leave it there because we got to go to do other things.
We do. So when I say balanced, we're going to probably end up needing to have an odd number, or we're going to have to figure out how the chair breaks a vote or something like that, because if it's equal number, we could end up with problems.
If it's a split vote, keep working.
It's a logistical issue, so we can work that out. But I think what I'm hearing is that we can come back with at least two scenarios from what I'm seeing on the notes I've taken, and we can come back with those proposals for you to consider.
At least two scenarios, and I'd want to take equal responsibility with OMA and Council Chief of Staff, Kristen Dennis, to work on this. Thanks.
Yep, agreed. Thank you, guys. Appreciate that. Not easy, creating a new committee, but it was time well spent, so thank you. Did you get what you need? Is there anything else?
And more. Yes, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it.
All right. With that, we'll close this portion out. Thank you for all of the work getting us to this point. And we will move on to Chief Operating Officer Communication, but we have our DCOO here. Holly, what do you got?
I apologize in advance. No, just joking. Just quickly wanted to thank everyone for attending our town hall. It sounds like we had about 200 folks online and 375 to 400 in person. We're still doing counts now, but pretty awesome. A special shout out to all the folks behind the scenes that helped organize it. Wanted to let councilors know I shared with you last week the full engagement survey. We will be coming back sometime in the spring once we have the department analysis and goal setting for an update. But if you have any questions in the meantime, certainly don't hesitate to reach out. We sent that out via email to employees as well. And lastly, just reminding folks that we have a Metro Mixer, the last one of the year, coming up Thursday, November 13th in Gresham. And so we are hoping to see many folks there.
Thank you. Counselors, anything to add for communication? Talked out.
Let's go eat.
All right.
I'll just add,
Councilor Rosenthal?
I happened to attend a Wilsonville City Council meeting. Two things of importance. First of all, they reaffirmed their diversity, equity, and inclusion processes and commitment to that. And secondly, they passed a climate action plan.
Great.
Which, not exactly the same as ours, but it looks sort of congruent.
Okay.
Point of personal privilege, Madam Chair. I want to send congratulations to Counselor Nolan, Patty Nolan, who was reelected to the Cambridge City of Council on Tuesday.
Oh, sister?
My sister, yes.
That's awesome.
Congratulations.
Congratulations,
Brags and boasts, money on the table.
coast to coast.
That's great. All right, well, we
Great choice.
will now take a brief recess for lunch. When we reconvene, and lunch is provided, correct?
Something out there.
Yeah.
It's
So
cold.
lunch is provided. Why don't we reconvene at 1:45? Is 10 minutes enough to bring food together and take a quick break? And we'll be back here?
Being here or in the dais?
No, we're here. It's a budget workshop.
Okay.
So we'll reconvene in 10 minutes here at 1:45.
light rail line right outside my hotel window.
Nice.
So if you hear clanging, that is the safety bell. Thank you, President Peterson, and good afternoon, Council. First, I want to thank Council for all the work that you've been doing over the last month to affirm and clarify Metro's strategic priorities and vision. The direction and themes that have come up in your retreat conversations will guide us as we start to dig into the budgeting process. As we begin the process of helping operationalize Council's direction, two of our key focus areas, and we actually have a slide deck. I don't know, is it up for you all? There we go. Go one forward. Perfect. Two of our key focus areas are going to be ensuring that we can continue to maintain core services and functions while responding to the ongoing uncertainty in our political and economic outlook. The federal and financial environments have been unpredictable and rapidly changing in this past year. While we can't necessarily control the circumstances we find ourselves in, as we move through the upcoming budget process, we will be looking for ways to shore up our operational resilience, prepare for an uncertain and potentially tumultuous future, and preserve the nimbleness and flexibility to respond to emerging issues. As the previous year has shown us, instability is emerging as the new normal, and rapid changes in the regulatory, political, and technological environments require that we have both dexterity and structural capacity to respond while maintaining our core mission. As an example, I'm speaking to you from San Jose, where a coalition of 3,000 public sector members is gathering to understand and leverage rapid advancement of AI technology across all sectors. Last year at the same summit, I believe I heard there were 50 members. This is the second year. If that gives you a sense of how fast things are growing and changing, and how important it is that government is learning and understanding what is happening in the world around us, because whether we want it to or not, these technologies are going to be used in our offices, and we really need to understand what the implications are and what the potential opportunities are as well. But back to the numbers. To help us get started on this conversation, our CFO, Brian Kennedy, is going to walk us through the economic outlook to give some context, and then move into the 5-year forecast for Metro. He'll wrap up with some information on the budget direction we'll be giving departments, and the budget priorities that will guide our decision-making, as well as give a quick preview of the budget process before opening the floor for your questions. So with that, I will hand it over to Brian.
Thank you, Marisa. I am Brian Kennedy, Chief Financial Officer, use he, him pronouns. Let's move to the next slide. Let's see, one more. All right, economic outlook. So this is an essential part of the budget process. It's really about context setting and understanding the ocean in which we are all swimming as we start this annual process of building our budget. So I'm going to go through some factors that I think represent some of the major themes and risks that Metro is facing, along with most other agencies. Then we're going to jump into the 5-year forecast, where you will see some of those themes manifest. And then we'll, as Marisa said, we'll wrap up with the direction that departments will be getting and a brief overview of the process. So let's go to the next slide. So we're going to start as typical, kind of at the most macro level, and then slowly drill down national, state, local. So interest rates are really important. This is a chart that comes from our independent financial advisor that helps invest Metro funds. The main thing to point out here is interest rate. This shows interest rates over the last 10 years, compares the 3-month Treasury, 2-year, and 10-year. And interest rates have been coming down. So, you know, we've seen the Federal Reserve do a couple interest rate cuts. But if you look at the table in the upper right, the thing to note is that 10-year note and then the final column on the right, the 12-month change. The 10-year note actually went up compared to a year from now. And what we're seeing here is the bond market pricing in both uncertainty and then concerns about federal fiscal policy. So things like the One Big Beautiful Bill, federal spending, are creating concerns about longer-term inflation. So even as the Federal Reserve is taking monetary policy actions like lowering the federal funds rate, there is concern about the health of the economy in the long run, and we're seeing the bond market price that in. So interest rates are falling, but similarly, you're not seeing similar drops in mortgage rates, in large part because mortgage rates tend to be tied more closely to the 10-year Treasury rather than the federal funds rate, which is the overnight rate the banks charge each other. An overriding theme we're going to see here is most of the economic trends that we pay attention to are going in the wrong direction, and this is one example. Some positive movement in the short-term rate in terms of the effects that has on economic activity, but real concerns about the long-term state of the economy. Next slide, please. So labor and consumption, these are a couple big factors that we track. So personal spending, one of the things we saw last year was that consumption and even consumption on services and activities tended to be up. That still looks relatively strong, but we think this is a relatively lagging indicator. That's the chart on top. If you look at the chart on the bottom, this is non-farm payrolls going back to August of 22, and the lines are a rolling average. The orange is a 6-month, the green is a 12-month average. Those are going down. So payrolls are dropping, and that, at some point, if that continues, you're going to see that show up in the consumption numbers. So consumption has been propping up big parts of the economy, but as the labor market gets more challenging, that's going to put a dent in people's willingness to spend, which creates kind of negative financial pressure across the economy. Next slide, please. So job openings per seeker, this is a key metric. You'll notice they peaked around February of 22 and have been going down since. So fewer companies are hiring. Clearly we've seen that here with significant layoffs at some of the region's largest employers. This is a negative trend. And then you look at the inflation chart below. So the blue is core inflation, the green is the broader inflation metric. Those were going down in a really positive trend from the high in 21 and 22, but they flattened out recently, and actually since April have been going up again. And increasing inflation is a challenge. The other key takeaway is the Federal Reserve's target rate for inflation is 2%. You'll notice both those lines are around 3%. So we're still well above the Federal Reserve's benchmark of where they want to see inflation. This is concerning both in terms of the increased cost it means for Metro and everybody else, but also because it means some of that federal monetary policy that might stimulate other parts of the economy may not happen or will be slower to happen. Next slide, please. This is a local chart from the Oregon Employment Department looking at non-farm employment just in the state. So the dark blue line is the Portland metro area, the green line is the Bend MSA, and then the gray is all other Oregon MSAs. A couple things to note here. So really since like 22, 23, the Portland MSA has been lagging most of the state. You'll notice in the most recent dip in that chart, the Bend MSA fell below Portland, and the gray line is still above. But notice where those land, all at basically 0%. So in Portland and Bend MSA, we're seeing decreases in employment, and the rest of the state is about flat. This is a concerning trend, and the trend on that line is down. Employment has been falling across the state and falling in the largest MSAs in the state. Next slide, please. So this is the average effective tariff rate. This is pre-substitution. You may see people talk about pre and post-substitution tariff rates. So pre-substitution is the rate as imposed by law. The post-substitution rate is when people make behavioral changes based on those tariffs. So they may buy non-tariff products. They may buy products produced locally or produced in the United States. So anyway, there are two different rates. This is the pre-substitution rate. The thing to note here is even we had the kind of the really intense spike in rates around April when the president announced significant level of tariffs. There's obviously been a lot of change. They've come down, but they're still significantly higher than they were before President Trump took office. And this is a concern for Oregon because Oregon actually is a big manufacturing state, both in terms, so this challenges us in terms of raw materials coming in that are used in those manufacturing activities, as well as trade wars, because we're also a big, we're an export state. And our three major export partners, which I think this is not too surprising and is probably true for most states in the US, are Canada, Mexico, and China. And those are places where we have some of the most challenging trade relationships right now. So the existence of tariff policy, the current tariff policy, puts a significant hamper on Oregon businesses. Kind of an interesting anecdote. I was at an event and ran into somebody that works for Nike, a high-level executive, and we were talking about everything that was happening in the world, and he says, well, I can't tell you how much tariffs are affecting our business. And he is obviously part of the manufacturing side, and the tariff policy is materially changing their ability to do business in the US. And like this is something that comes up in casual conversation. So as much as sometimes federal policy feels a little distant, it's having really meaningful effects on some of the key economic drivers in our region. Next slide. So AI, like Marisa mentioned, it's lifting the stock market. This chart below shows the orange line is the S&P 500 over 18 months, and the green, or the blue line, sorry, is the Magnificent Seven. So these are the kind of the 7 largest tech companies: Apple, Microsoft, Google, Meta, Tesla, NVIDIA, and there's one more I'm missing. It's not important. So a couple things to note here. So number one, if you took that Magnificent Seven out and basically their investments in AI, the S&P 500 would be flat over this time frame. So this AI investment is really driving the economy. This one kind of really interesting kind of piece of context I heard, the Apollo program, from over the time frame that the U.S. government was doing it, in current day dollars, invested about $300 billion in the space program. These Magnificent Seven companies, or hyperscalers as they're called, are making that same level of investment about every 10 months. So Apollo, 10 years, $300 billion, AI, same amount in a 10-month time frame. This is going to have a huge impact on the economy. This chart is through the end of October. Now, if we ran this chart as of yesterday, NVIDIA, which is responsible for the biggest jump in that blue line, their stock had a significant correction yesterday. They lost about $2 billion in market cap based on an investor deciding to short their stock because of concerns that the AI is a bubble. If that bubble bursts, that's going to have big impacts. Some local context on this is one of my neighbors works for Intel in the data center business. They were white knuckling it through the layoffs because the data center business was considered a cost center. Now, Intel's data center business has turned into a profit center, and they're holding on to the data center business because Intel has figured out some ways to support AI infrastructure. So it's very relevant to the local economy, both in terms of companies here making investments, but also the overall kind of impact on the economy as a whole. As a side note, this chart I produced with AI yesterday. And it's right, I checked it. So, do you have a question?
I just want to say shout out to Oregon Public Schools for educating and raising Jensen Huang, who grew up in Aloha and is now CEO of NVIDIA. Shout out to our public schools.
All right, next slide. You may have seen this chart in Willamette Week. The article was about I think the Portland City Council getting an education on compression, using Big Pink as an example, showing the decline in real market values, intersecting with assessed values and going down. The downtown core continues to be a big problem. This is causing significant property tax collection issues for the city of Portland, for Multnomah County. Metro is fortunate in that we have a broad property tax base. But there are some interesting stories happening here. Washington County had a significant increase in assessed value year over year. Now, part of that was because of some of Intel's properties coming out of their strategic investment program, tax deferral program, and so actual organic property tax growth in Washington County was, I think, about 4%. Pretty common for Washington County. If those properties go back into the SIP, if Intel commits to making new investments, some of that revenue might go away. But again, there's a big question and part of it's based on Intel's decision making. And it just shows how dependent we are on some of these large corporations in the region when it comes to our property taxes and the way it supports the zoo, Parks and Nature, as well as all of our local government partners. Next slide. So transient lodging tax, this continues to be a big challenge. So this chart, so the blue line is actuals. I updated this from last year. The thing to note is our actuals in fiscal year 25 were down over fiscal year 24. We had been talking about a transient lodging tax recovery. I don't think we can use that word anymore. We're into the third consecutive year of year-over-year declines in transient lodging tax. So the orange line was our previous forecast, and that red dot is when we expected transient lodging tax to recover to pre-pandemic levels. But the fiscal 26 figure in that forecast would require transient lodging taxes next year to increase more than 10%. But that's not going to happen. So that green line, this is not a forecast. I just took a scenario. What if in the current fiscal year, transient lodging tax was flat? At this point, flat would be great. What if it was flat this year and then increased 3% a year? It would take us, so it pushes that pre-pandemic recovery level out to sometime between 2036 and 37. That is obviously well beyond during the pandemic when we thought we would get there. And this is a big problem because transient lodging tax is a major source of operating support for the convention center, for P5, and provides capital funding for the convention center and Expo as well. This is a really big challenge. And again, I think we can't talk about transient lodging tax recovery slowing. It's like we're not recovering, we're stalling. Next slide, please. This is 10-year regional tonnage. The solid line is actuals and the dotted line is forecast. We're forecasting tonnage being down next year and then flat the year after. The thing to take away from this slide, this is not Metro's waste reduction activities working. This is regional economic activity slowing. Activity that tends to produce garbage, and while we would like to see less of it, it is an indicator about levels of regional activity, and so we are seeing that decrease. I mean, I think you could probably argue we're in a tonnage recession at this point, and this has implications in a couple areas. Number one, it shows that we have some challenges around regional economic activity, particularly construction, which is an important part of our housing strategy. Having more housing is going to help make housing more affordable, but we are not building a lot of it right now. And number two, this is going to put upward pressure on rates because our fixed costs stay similar, but the amount of tons that we're spreading those costs across are decreasing. So the kind of challenges abound. Next slide, please. So I always like to review kind of my takeaways from the prior year forecast. So last year, we noted that there was strength in the national economy, but the Oregon economy was positive and there's some weakness in the local economy. I think you can see from the charts, that's kind of a shrug moment. The national economy, still is strong, but again, a lot of that is driven by spending in AI. And then we're seeing more challenges in the Oregon economy. It's not as positive as it seemed like it would be last year. Local conditions may overwhelm some more macro factors. Like one of the things we were seeing last year was more spending on services and experiences, which we thought might drive some additional activity at our venues. And again, so those local factors like perceptions of downtown, other things, it still seems like that is the case. While consumption is still strong, we're not seeing that recovery manifest in increased attendance at P5, for example. Last year, we predicted that slow TLT recovery would be an ongoing challenge. That has definitely been true. And then significant uncertainty across the board was a major factor last year. Very true still. So next slide. So from the view this year, the strength of the national economy is positive. There is some concern there, though. Depending on who you ask, AI is either a bubble or here to stay. No one really knows. But the weakness in the state economy is a concern because it's not just the Portland metro area. We're seeing it across the whole state now. Tariffs and other federal policies are presenting significant risk to the Oregon economy. And then transient lodging tax stagnation is a real challenge. And the overall, I think, Marisa used a different word that I'm blanking on at the moment, but I chose uncertainty. Uncertainty abounds. Like if I could make that dance and all the fancy things your phone can do, like uncertainty is the word. Because we're seeing it in all factors across all of Metro, all of the region, all of the state. All right, next slide. So as we think about the 5-year forecast, again, inflation continues to be a concern. It's going back up, but even as it has moderated somewhat from the highs of 21 and 22, a lot of those increased costs are still baked into our budgets. And so it continues to be a challenge. Our venues continue to be financially strained despite the budget cuts we made last year. And then property taxes and excise taxes are stable, but there are some warning signs. Property taxes, again, it's problems downtown, the value of downtown real estate, and then our excise tax, while we have a formula that is designed for stability, it's based on tonnage. So even as it generates a stable level of revenue, that rate will increase to provide that stable level of revenue. Next slide, please. So as we go into the 5-year forecast, our key assumptions were that inflation would be between 2 and 3%. That might not be aggressive enough right now, given where we're at. We also predicted that interest rates will fall over the next 5 years. I think that will happen. It's the pace at which they fall is really uncertain. For the next budget year, our PERS employer rates are stable, but we know they're going to go up in fiscal year 27-28. The PERS rates are set on a biennial basis, so they're stable for 2 years. That next reevaluation comes for fiscal 27-28. Next slide, please. All right, so we're in the 5-year forecast now. So on the general fund side, the good news here is the excise tax is stable. By formula set in Metro Code, it's very stable. Central services cost recovery is most of the general fund, so most of the resource that comes into the general fund is money from other Metro departments to pay for things like finance, HR, IT, communications, capital asset management. And so while that is stable, the stress that external departments are in is a risk. If we have to manage those costs because of the financial strain in external departments, it's a challenge. So our general fund is pretty small. I think the way to think about it is kind of over the last several years, our total agency budget is about $2 billion. It's a little less this year. So $2 billion, but then you take the general fund, say 200 million-ish, actual discretionary general fund, about 20 million. So our general fund is really small relative to the rest of the agency. And again, mostly reflects the financial condition of the rest of the agency. So let's go to the next slide. So planning and research and development. So you'll notice here, so the blue line is resources or revenues, the red line is requirements. In the first couple of years, those resources are above requirements. And you'll also notice that there's a decrease in both lines over the first 2 years of the forecast. This is because we have a lot of one-time money in the planning department. So some of that is transit-oriented development funds that we hold on to and then spend as projects come around. Some of it are grant funds that we've received. This is a normal part of that forecast. The thing to pay attention to as we move into years 3, 4, 5 of the forecast, that expenditure line starts moving above resources. So we're anticipating some constraint around federal funding and costs increasing faster than that federal funding. So, we don't have a crisis here, but it's something that we're going to have to manage into. We think that formula funding right now will be relatively stable, but we're anticipating a lower level of discretionary grants than we've received in the past. Next slide, please. Supportive housing services, we're assuming that spending will match revenues. So pretty much every dollar that comes in, the counties are going to get out the door, and that the carryover balances will be fully spent down by 27-28. That's why you see those expenditures above revenues in the first year. That is the spend down of those remaining carryover balances. Next slide, please. The Affordable Housing Bond Fund, this is pretty consistent with what we've been showing you the last couple of years. We're spending down. We expect the final project cost to go out the door in fiscal year 28-29. There will be a little bit of money that hangs around as these projects wrap up. That's pretty normal for bond funds, but things are basically proceeding according to the schedule we anticipated. Next slide, please. So the Parks and Nature Operating Fund, these lines are very close together. This is, maybe not exactly good news, but it shows that the budget reductions we made last year worked. So that revenue line stays over expenditures for the first 3 years. We have gotten that budget in balance and it is stable. And even in the out years, that red line creeps above the revenue line. That's not uncommon. We expect that expenses tend to rise faster than our revenues, particularly in things that are funded by property taxes, because we have that statutory limit on the growth in assessed value. And those lines are close enough together that that's something we can manage. So the department is kind of not in that really challenging financial position they were before. We know there's still a gap between what they think they need to do and the resources they have, but from a financial management perspective, we are stable. And I think that's good news. Next slide, please. The Parks and Nature Bond Fund, again, consistent with the Affordable Housing Bond, things are proceeding according to schedule. We expect to do the third and final bond sale around fiscal year 27-28, and that we are expecting most bond funds to be expended by fiscal year 33. We will likely still have some of the taxable bonds we issued for Nature and Neighborhoods grants hanging on longer. Just like with the 2006 bond, those were some of the last dollars to move out the door. But again, things are going according to schedule here. Next slide, please. Waste prevention and environmental services. As for a utility, you would expect, our revenue and expense lines are very close together. We will generate the revenue we need to cover the costs that the system generates. This doesn't include major new capital costs for implementation of the system facilities plan. That work is still in progress to figure out the timing and exactly what that looks like. But from an operational basis, we're stable. The thing to note here is that the forecasted tonnage decline is going to put upward pressure on rates, both on our metro facility rates as well as the regional system fee. Next slide, please. So the convention center, we're moving into the venues now. This shows one of our really significant ongoing challenges. Our expenses are forecasted to be above revenues for 4 of the 5 years in this forecast. We knew we had some big challenges last year in the convention center. A lot of the events that we would have expected to be booked in this time would have been booked in fiscal years 21, 22, 23, when that wasn't really happening. And so we have kind of ongoing financial stress that we don't have the solid book of business we need to cover our costs, combined with the stagnation in transient lodging tax is putting significant operating pressure on the convention center. Capital funding is a challenge. The bars on the bottom show the convention center fund balance going negative starting in year 2. And we obviously won't let that happen, but if the convention center were to complete their capital projects that they believe are necessary with this financial forecast, they would eat through all of their reserves. This is going to be something that we have to approach in the budget process to figure out how we stabilize the convention center over the short term. Travel Portland is doing a lot. Our OCC sales team is doing a lot to try to do this. It's just hard to bring in enough revenue to cover those costs, especially with the hole that TLT funding leaves. Next slide, please. P5 is in much the same position. Expenses over revenues. Part of this is lower than average attendance, particularly compared to the last decade. Part of it is the lack of that TLT operating support. Part of it is anticipated competition from new concert venues, particularly other venues coming in and taking some of that kind of most profitable book of business that P5 has. The political uncertainty adds some new challenges. And then again, the lack of capital funding is a major challenge. And if you completed, the capital projects that they need, their fund balance would go into the negative over the 5 years. So this is a similar story to last year, similar challenges. And I know council will be having more conversations about P5 in the near future. Next slide. Here's a small bright spot. So OCC, you'll notice the blue line is over the red line. Revenues are over expenditures for pretty much for all 5 years. And we're getting back to some of that more normal trend that we saw where in those years where the revenues more significantly exceed expenditures, it's because of Cirque du Soleil. So we have, through the reorganization with OCC, been pretty successful in managing operating costs. And we expect that in those years where we have some of those big events, we'll actually generate net revenues. That's really good news. It's showing that there's more potential there at Expo than we were seeing over the last couple of years. Capital funding is still a significant challenge, and OCC is unique this year. Of the 3 Merck venues, it's the only one that doesn't have a projection of their fund balance going negative. So this is a positive story. We made a significant change. It looks like it's working. Next slide, please. So the Oregon Zoo, you might look at this and say, we really need to worry about those last 3 years. I don't think that's necessarily the takeaway here. So expenditures in the outer years of the forecast are over revenues. A couple things going on there. Number one, the zoo has some pretty conservative assumptions about labor costs in those out years that I think are maybe a little too conservative, not unreasonable. But also we know that in those outer years, that's when zoo bond construction projects are going to start to ramp up, and those have attendance impacts. So this is a normal thing we saw with the last zoo bond. It's not uncommon. The good news is the zoo has a really healthy fund balance, so we can manage through those revenue impacts driven by construction. Labor costs are an ongoing challenge at the zoo, and just like last year, growing revenue is going to require creativity and innovation. We have some natural limits to the number of people we can move through the zoo on a regular basis because of the geography, because of parking, all those factors. But I think the good news is we have a really creative and innovative zoo team that's going to figure out how we do that. Next slide. Oregon Zoo Bond Fund. There's really nothing to see here. We issued the first tranche of bonds. The zoo bond projects are getting started. We're assuming a second bond sale in fiscal year 27-28. The expenditure schedule is still preliminary. They're working on scoping these projects out. We'll know more, but things are going according to schedule. Nothing to worry about here. Next slide. So the direction to departments, just like last year, all departments are going to need to submit balanced budgets. Our general fund departments, we're asking, so which is mostly our central services, asking them to submit status quo budgets, basically current service level budgets. And then modification requests, budget additions really need to be focused on our highest and most urgent priorities, particularly those consistent with the priorities the council has identified. Next slide, please. As we think about the overall approach to fiscal year 26-27, we want to make sure our budgeting is fiscally responsible so that we can mitigate uncertainty as much as possible. We can't control for everything, but we want to make sure that we have flexibility to respond to challenges as they arise. Just like last year, we're going to continue really carefully scrutinizing central services costs and focusing on how we maintain our core services and the prioritization of policy execution. Doing the things that we promised to voters is a key priority, and we need to make sure that that is first and foremost in how we approach the budget. Next slide, please. In terms of the budget process, so draft budgets are due to the COO on January 8th. The proposed budget will be published and distributed to you on April 3rd. And then the proposed budget presentation starts on the 9th, as well as council deliberation. That's when we move into the really public phase of the budget process, where you will have a number of public hearings and opportunities to hear from departments and deliberate on the budget. Next slide, please. So attached to the materials on the agenda are the counselor direction and idea form. This is essentially the same form that was provided to you last year. If you want to use it, it is a way to convey to staff an idea for a change in the budget that you might want to see. Helps give us some guidance in giving you the information you need to craft potential proposals for the budget. So that is in the packet. If you have questions about that, you can send those to me, you can send those to Marisa, you can talk to policy advisors, and they will connect with staff to make sure that you get the information you need to complete that process. But again, we want you to make sure that you feel like you have ways to request information and get what you need to formulate any proposals you might have. Next slide. So we are at the end. If you have overall priorities for the budget, we would love to hear them. I know you've spent a lot of time in retreat talking about your priorities. And then are there any specific investments that you'd like to see developed for your consideration in the spring? Things that we can make sure that are in the proposed budget when it comes to you. And that is all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Marisa. Questions, comments? I would just say I'm having deja vu to 2008 at Clackamas County. It's not feeling real good. And I'm just wondering what other, besides the work that you've already done in the past to get ready for knowing that something like this was coming, what other operational things are we looking at in terms of efficiencies to be able to hedge off that uncertainty? That's not even a terminology. To hedge for, I don't know, the engineer's coming out. How do we make sure that we're ready for this?
I would say I think we are, in a lot of ways, as ready as we can be. We revised our financial policies over the pandemic. We have, particularly in the general fund, reserves higher than kind of historically we've ever had them. We have, and council has taken actions to protect reserves in our solid waste fund, in our parks and nature operating fund. We used the general fund to support our visitor venues during the pandemic to try to protect some of those reserves. And I think that's a key element of that resilience strategy, where we don't have to make immediate decisions. We have time to react and time to plan as we learn more about situations. I think some of the actions, for example, that Marisa took, combining the oversight of OCC and Expo Center, has been a really critical action to achieve efficiencies there, and we're seeing the benefit at Expo. So no, we are looking at these things on a regular basis. We are making investments in our technology, particularly our financial and HR systems, to try to improve efficiencies across the organization. So I think we're doing the right things at this time. The hard part is the extent of the uncertainty. There's no real bound on when we think this will end. It's hard to know kind of what the time frame is, and we have to be able to be responsive and not be afraid to take actions that we need to take when we have enough information, which I think we did last year during the budget process. We made some really hard choices, and we may need to make some of those again.
Councilors? Questions, comments? I have more.
Many thoughts.
Go ahead, Councilor Wong.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Brian. I think in the last budget cycle, you and the CO's office had talked about taking steps to maximize like flexibility in this uncertain time. Can you speak a little bit more about that and actually how it's gone? Like you set up that framework, that system to maximize flexibility. Like how has that been working, and what can we anticipate in the future?
I think the biggest way you see that is in prioritizing protecting our reserves so that we have the ability to respond. And actually, last Tuesday is a great example of that. Council identified a high priority investment in food security, and we were able to meet that need with general fund reserves that we had set aside. So that in some ways is the perfect example. And we have tried to kind of, maintain that strategy as much as possible across all of our enterprises. Should have mentioned the zoo actually has a historically high level of reserves at this time, higher than certainly all of my time at Metro. So they have a lot of flexibility in how they respond to challenges. What we're seeing, where the kind of the pinch point is in the convention center, P5, Expo. We're now in, approaching year 6 of a really challenging economic period. So we are straining our ability to maintain those reserves. We had some things that were really positive, like during the pandemic, the shuttered venue operators grants brought in $10 million for the Oregon Zoo and P5. The Oregon Zoo still pretty much has that money sitting in the bank to protect them. P5 had to spend most of that on the roof at Schnitzer. So there are some limits on our ability to be flexible, and we're seeing the continued strain for the venues stretching our ability to maintain that flexibility.
One thing I learned when we went to Minneapolis was they really put an emphasis on not just spending money, but making investments. Can you speak a little bit more about how you're I thought the investments at the Expo and the sports equipment, like things like that, like where are we making investments in our future?
Yeah, I think Expo is a great example. Last year, Council set aside $2 million for investments in sports equipment at Expo to try to bring in some new events and make them more competitive as they bid for events. I think kind of it remains to be seen how effective that'll be. I mean, and not trying to suggest that it's not, just we're pretty early into that process, and we'll learn more over the next 6 months, year of how effective that strategy has been. We also have been focused on making some investments internally, and one of the big ones is in our financial and HR systems, our enterprise resource planning system, which is a really key part of improving internal efficiencies. And that's an area where, because I think one of my visions, and Maurice's visions, is moving to be more of a data-driven organization where we are making decisions based on data and metrics, but we also need the internal systems to really be able to support that. So investing in that right now is critical. So we're continuing to move forward on that project, and I think it's going to deliver a lot of benefits in a relatively short period of time.
Anyone else? Councilor Gonzalez.
Always an expert, my good sir. Thank you. President Peterson, you brought up the sentiment about 2008 and the leadership that you had to, and so many other people in the region needed to kind of deploy, kind of re-envision some of the tables, things that we do to help recover the economy. So having not been really present around that time, I'm wondering, and I don't know if this is a question for you, Brian, or for the council, or for folks that might want to chime in, just an open-ended question. It seems that the data is showing a much slower recovery than what we might have hoped. So it's like we're looking mid-2030s, early 2030s on some indicators. How much of our attention and energy on the council and as an agency should be focused on economic generating activities, or policy, if that makes sense? And I'm kind of, again, I'm calling in the leadership from 2008. How did the region respond? And, I think from my perspective, Metro manages growth, air quotes, rather than support growth. I think it's like a fine blade of what side that you look at that. And maybe it's an existential question around what does that look like for us, and specifically within this budget process and what Councilor Huang is mentioning in terms of investments. How should the council be thinking about that in terms of either budget notes or amendments or positions within COO or council office or GAP-D to really be thinking about this question about shifting the direction of our local economy? Big question. I hope I landed it.
Council President.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you for this question, Councilor Gonzalez, because I think, and I'm excited to hear what Brian might say too. With respect to Metro, if you look at that TLT graph, the transient lodging tax graph that Brian showed, that is a reflection of the number of people who are coming to visit Portland and staying in hotels. And that is something that I think the council can play an active role in with our partners at Travel Portland, with our partners at the city, with Sport Oregon. I think that we have some more short-term levers there potentially that we could deploy versus some longer-term economic development strategies that are, just may take more time, but. We could have a very focused conversation about how to bring more people to Portland. Brian?
That's a great answer. I was going to retreat for a second into professor mode. Conceptually, when you're facing fiscal stress or economic stress, the government, has two tools: monetary policy tools, fiscal policy tools. Unfortunately, Metro doesn't control the currency. That would be fun. But we have some fiscal policy tools. Now, granted, the scale at which we operate is different than the federal government or the state government. And part of what you saw in 2008 was, all levels of government, and I think one thing we learned is the federal government, not enough, engaging with those fiscal policy tools and making counter-cyclical economic investments. And in 2008, Metro had the zoo bond, had the natural areas bond that were great tools for some of those counter-cyclical investments. Today, we still have the Parks and Nature bond. The zoo bond is just kicking off. As we are facing economic stress, Metro has $380 million plus that are going to be poured into the local economy in a stimulative way, and I think that's really positive. And so I think a lot of times in terms of that scale, what are the biggest impacts we can make? And those tend to be on our voter-supported measures. But also going back to the conversation you all had on Tuesday, the list of issues you were talking about are all issues that could be really important counter-cyclical type investments in a challenging economy. So I think you're focused on the right things and how Metro shows up to strengthen the local economy.
Thanks. Thanks, Professor. I wonder, sidebar, but what you would do if you were in charge of currency. Anyway, that's a different conversation. Printer Gober. Anyway, I am super. I think to the work that Councilor Simpson, and I appreciate the foresight a year ago to think about economic development committee and ideas. And I'm wondering if the council should institutionalize something like that for a longer period of time to look at work staffing investments in that sense. And I'm hearing you, Brian, and Marisa, in terms of the public investments that we steward and that we can bring to the table to generate activity. But I think that what we're missing also is the role of our local private sector and how we can create an environment for partnerships. Because as we mentioned in other conversations, the federal government is a more unlikely partner, right? Our local economy is not strong. And so in a lot of ways, it's this question that I keep hearing from folks is how does Oregon take care of Oregon, Portland take care of Portland, Greater Portland take care of Greater Portland? And if you're a company that's headquartered here, or you're an agency that's headquartered here, or whatever, how do we bring our best thinking and our leverage? Anyway, that's a whole different thing, but I'm thinking through some of the work that's actively happening in our subcommittee and if we need to be thinking about that a little bit differently in terms of Metro's role going forward, especially seeing the flat stagnation.
I'll add one last thing. I think the other thing that we can do is look to some of those risks that could add to the instability or add to the insecurity that we face. A huge one of those is the Blazers and what would happen to our economy if they left town. I know that there are others. So there's things that we can do that we could invest in to expand our economy. There's also things that we could do to prevent our economy from getting worse. And I think I really appreciate this council being focused on that and keeping that, on the discussion table.
Thanks.
It would be nice to also add to that research the work that's been done in countries where there's been an export of people, right? So Japan has been going through this recently. Italy, other European nations. So I think there are probably some programs and policies that we could look at as part of that economic growth strategy. How do you attract people back? How do you keep them here?
I think that's a great point. I'm maybe a glutton for punishment, but one of my volunteer activities is serving on the long-range facility planning committee for the Beaverton School District. And they knew that enrollment was going to slow, but since 2020, it has been, I don't know what is precipitously, both up and down, slowing precipitously, is that a thing? Mm-hmm. It is a pretty serious decline, and so a lot of our school districts in the region are facing this. So it's not just one government having this challenge, it's all governments, and kind of, I think to the extent that we are all in this together and working together on the problem, there's a lot of power there.
I guess the thing that's worrying me the most here is that we haven't had the 2008 yet, that it might be coming. If there's a bubble, it hasn't hit yet, and you won't know when it hits. I mean, you won't know the date it hits. And that's what I meant by 2008, is that we had to, there was a lot of very difficult decisions in a very short amount of time, just like the pandemic. And that was just, so that's what I meant by, is there any way to buffer against that as well? And start thinking about how to do business differently. Any other questions, comments, worries? Well, just we had the budget session, not the budget session, the retreats, and while there was an initial conversation about priorities, there certainly isn't a set priority list yet with any kind of timing. I'm just saying this out loud. There is some options that staff will be coming back to us with in terms of timing and needs in order to do that. But besides that, that's the only thing that we have talked about. And that was just in terms of ballot measures. There has not been a discussion yet on priorities beyond that. So I know you know that, I'm just saying it out loud. And we're gonna need to work through that as well. All right, nothing more for the good of the order. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for everyone who is here and has worked on the bits and pieces of this. And Marisa, thank you for taking time out of your conference. All right, seeing no further discussion, the council meeting is adjourned. And our next regularly scheduled meeting is November 13th at 10:30 a.m. See you there.
Record.